Okay, welcome to the MSAD 51 Board of Directors meeting for Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Roll call, we've got everybody here except Tom currently, but I think he is coming, though he may sneak in and out because he's coaching basketball. So, first item of business is recognition. So I believe Carl, are you going to do that? Where's Carl? There's Carl. Are you going to introduce that? Yeah. Sure. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Francis, principal at Greeley High School. Very pleased to be here tonight. Tonight, I wanted to recognize some of our students. We have 5 students here tonight presenting on sustainability at our schools and in our community. The work has been done through the Climate Action Group and the Global Awareness Group, supported by Peter Scott, teachers Peter Scott, Julie Dowdy, and Brian Bloom. The students that will be presenting tonight, their names are Julia Brubaker, Madeline Hall, Andrew Flanders, Sylvia Harvey, and Jack Gervais. So I look forward to their presentation tonight on sustainability at Greeley High School and the Cumberland community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Do I hear a motion?
We're in the back.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
we do not have any minutes, and they'll be for January 17th. We'll have them ready.
My bad. Very good. All right, moving on. Public comment. So I'll just remind people to try to keep it to 3 minutes, and I'll keep track. And anybody like to speak, come on up, introduce yourself.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Brooks, excuse me, 36-year resident of Cumberland, 42-and-a-half-year employee of MSAD 51. Just in case I didn't make a lasting impression the previous 2 board meetings, I'm back to give it another try. I don't really like to hear myself talk, and I don't usually make a habit of badgering school board members. I just feel strongly that the ESPs of MSAD 51 deserve a fair and competitive contract, and that it shouldn't be necessary to have to fight so hard to get one. When you think about it, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. It's a little one-sided, admittedly, but I do welcome your input. One would think that, considering the current job market, the district would readily offer a contract that both attracts new employees and retains current ones, as well as one that reflects the inflation rate we've all been dealing with these days. The token raise offered by your negotiators ignores both of these aspects. It makes me wonder, board members and parents, do you really agree with how the board negotiators have been handling things? Do they represent how you think and feel about ESPs and their contract? If not, we would welcome your support in this struggle that we shouldn't be having. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jerry McGillicuddy. I am a 30-plus year resident of Cumberland. I am in my 17th year working as an ed tech in special education, presently at Greeley Middle School. My husband was a teacher in the district for over 25 years and is now retired. I've been thinking a lot about what we've all been saying, and I realized a lot of you board members are lay people and do not work in schools, so may not know what ed techs do on a daily basis. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview. We teach small groups, we reteach, we pre-teach. We plan small group lessons for students. We staff after-school homework clubs in some buildings. We staff recess, lunch, arrival, and dismissal duties. We provide support in classrooms so our students can be successful, feeling part of their group of peers, while also enabling the teachers to work on their craft of teaching and not worry about some behaviors that might pop up along the way. Let's see. We ride buses. We help staff summer programs. We do a lot. And in those jobs, we are professional, we are dedicated, we are caring, compassionate, we are fastidious in what we do, and some of us are struggling. It's not easy to pay bills at this point. I've always told my children to treat others the way they would like to be treated, and also to know that your actions speak louder than words. During the pandemic, things were rough for everyone, and we witnessed that with how the school board was attacked, how our superintendent was attacked, and we all stood behind everyone. And teachers, our superintendent saw it was a snow day, or it could have been a snow day, and it was planned to be remote. And finally he just said, no, we're taking a snow day. We're having a real snow day. Everybody needs the break. We had been hearing all along, you know, we appreciate the work you're doing. We know everyone's working hard. His actions spoke volumes more than his words. Last year, again, I think it was right before February vacation. Is that right, Jeff? We were again rewarded and awarded a day off before the vacation started because it was tough. Being in the buildings day in and day out was hard for many people, and the actions once again spoke louder than the words. We look to our neighboring communities. We see what they're doing. We compare ourselves to them in many aspects. Our neighboring communities have rewarded their ed techs with a sustainable raise. We ask that you have it in your hearts to do the same. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Hall-Riddle. I'm the librarian at Greeley Middle School.
I'm Heather Parkinson. I'm the librarian at the high school.
As two of your three district librarians, we would like to talk a little bit about the specialized ed techs who work in our district's libraries. These phenomenal staff members serve a tremendously important role and should be compensated accordingly. Many people don't realize what they do for our students and staff. They do more than check books in and out and shelve them. Way more. Our ed techs assist us in teaching the critical digital and media literacy skills that are so necessary for 21st century students and our future citizens. They help us teach a library curriculum to meet the district's goals and help us meet state and national standards. They allow us to work with teaching staff to plan and coordinate meaningful learning experiences both in and out of the library space to support all aspects of the curriculum. In many cases, we simply could not do our jobs without the assistance of these ed techs. For example, in the elementary school where enrollment has skyrocketed, the ed tech and the librarian are teaching classes simultaneously. In the middle school, which operates as two separate schools, there are simultaneous classes occurring as well, along with regular library functions. We rely on our ed techs to teach the library classes we plan, and we depend on them to have classroom management and instructional skills that are as good as our regular classroom teachers. We need to be able to attract and keep skilled staff in order to meet the needs of our students. Please consider the importance of these crucial staff members and their impact on students when you conduct these contract negotiations. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Luann Balzano Brooks. I'm an ed tech at Wilson School, and I was surprised and disappointed that the board barely recognized the people who spoke so passionately on behalf of ESPs a month ago at the school board meeting. I was so surprised that instead the board chose to focus on reading a previously written formal statement. I personally just felt like we were unheard, that we had no voice, and in all honesty, that didn't feel good. My husband Jeffrey Brooks and I were two of those speakers that spoke a month ago, and we told you how many years we've worked in the district individually. He just mentioned again 42 and a half years, and I 20 and a half years. So I thought a little bit more about that, and I realized that we have a combined 63 years of dedicated employment at MSAD 51. Think about that. 63 years. That's a lot of years. That's a lot of dedication. I'm here to speak again because ESPs are still working without a contract. I'll remind you that we have been working without a contract since June of 2022. We've not had a raise since July of 2021. And even with the second job I've been working, Jeffrey and I are finding it more and more difficult to pay bills, buy groceries, and gas, and heat our home. You would think that after 63 combined years of employment, we'd be making a living wage. But here we are, pleading for just that. We are dedicated employees, obviously. We work hard, very hard. We love our jobs. We're asking the board to do the right thing, as our neighboring districts, Falmouth and Yarmouth, have done. Give us a fair contract. Pay us a living wage. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Others that would like to speak before we close public comment? Okay. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. As you probably know, since our last meeting, we have had no further mediation meetings on the topic of the EdTech contract. And being that we're in mediation now, you know, as I mentioned before, we can't discuss substantive things as much as I would love to, as much as I agree with many of the things being said. We can't discuss it, and that's hard to sit up here and hear these things and not be able to speak openly about them. I can say broadly, we want to reward our employees very much and come to an agreement as soon as possible. Without going into details, would anybody like to add anything to that? Okay.
I as well appreciate all that you do.
Wish I could say more. I'm sorry. Thank you for being here. Thank you for expressing your thoughts. Much of it we would agree wholeheartedly with. Okay. Moving on. If you guys want to scoot out, yeah, we'll pause for a minute. Thank you. Yep. Yep, let's let them get out, and then, yeah, you can hop up there, sure. Go for it.
Yes. Happy New Year, Board. Scott Jordan, Cumberland. Just quickly, back on December 22nd in your newsletter to the district, Mr. Porter, towards the bottom of it, it looks like the board, I believe, entered into an extended option agreement on the 76-acre parcel of land at 80 Gray Road, Mr. Grover's property, I believe. I believe that project was voted down, correct?
Correct, but the board has the ability to enter into an extended option on land without order approval, just to keep that land open as an option down the road. So it's a 5-year extended option. And the board can do that if the district voters choose down the road to build a school on that piece of property, then that property would still be available, and that was the reason.
Can you tell us what that would cost us as taxpayers, the community?
For each year, it would be paying the property taxes of the landowner in order to keep the option agreement. That's the only cost
So
to
what
the
would
district.
what would that cost us?
I don't have that figure in front of me.
It's
We can
about
get that.
$8,000 a year.
Okay. $8,000 a year for 5 years on a project that was voted down, right? Or a referendum that was voted down?
We also have the ability to get out of the option agreement. There's a exit clause as well.
Okay. And the community wasn't, they didn't have a say in that, correct?
That's up to the board.
So the problem, Scott, with the way that you're sort of laying this out is we don't know exactly why that project failed.
Right.
There isn't like a ranked choice on the ballot.
Right.
You know, what's the top 5 reasons why you didn't like this project? And we've talked about this at length, but when I woke up Wednesday morning and learned that 4 other projects in the area, public projects, failed, that was the most telling thing to me. So people are not feeling confident about the financial future.
Right.
And so, that kicks things down the road a little ways. Now, it was a big price tag, sure, but ultimately people aren't feeling confident. And so the rest of it, it's really hard to figure out. To me, until we have a better option on the table, for sure, it was irresponsible to let that fall away. The option was expiring at the end of November. We had to sort of move quickly. And thankfully, the landowner was happy to do it, I think partly because he really does want to see a school in North Yarmouth. And to me, $8,000 a year in a $44 million budget is not a ton of money to keep that open. $8,000, yeah, it's not fun to spend that, but it keeps a door open and an option open where we don't have another option right now.
Right. Thank you for explaining. Appreciate it.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else for public comment? Okay, so I'll close that again and move on to presentations. So first up is our solar project, and Bill Shane and company are here, and Bill will do much better than myself, so I'll let him take it away.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe next time I get a choice where we go on the agenda. That's a hard act to follow, so, wow. Thank you very much for putting us on the agenda tonight. We are at a place, the Solar Committee was appointed late last summer, early last fall by the Town Council and the Board of Selectmen, and with the endorsement of the school board, to see if we could move forward the idea of a solar farm that would power the entire Greeley campus and whatever future campus might come out. That project could be successful. Tonight you're going to hear from experts much more bright in this field than I am. And the amazing thing in our own community, we have people both in North Yarmouth and Cumberland that'll kind of walk you through the process and explain a little bit more about solar, how it works, and the two processes that we have to follow. And I'm excited that they're here tonight. But ultimately, the committee came to a recommendation after soliciting proposals through the Portland Press Herald for requests for qualifications to build us a solar facility. Two firms submitted proposals for that, Amoresco and Revision Energy. Both were reviewed by the committee, and unanimously the committee selected Revision Energy of Maine. So tonight we would like to walk you through a little bit more about the solar piece. Mr. Scott's team is here in force tonight to also talk about why it's important to them. And then we'll kind of kick back to what might be the next steps. But we are prepared to work continuously with school staff and with the board to perhaps get this to the next step of the process. And we hope tonight that you too will understand that we need an expert like Revision Energy to take us any further. They have done multiple facilities. They built the facility for the town that now powers all the town-owned facilities in our community. That has been an actual net savings in electricity for the town of Cumberland. And we would encourage you to at least explore the next steps in that process. Revision Energy is willing to work with the board and with the SAD staff. My staff is willing to work with the SAD staff, of course, to help continue. Revision has basically held our hands through this entire process. There's a lot of regulatory issues that are on the table when it comes to solar, and it's changing almost every day. So Mike Williams, who I really appreciate your help, Mike. You do this on a daily basis as well. Mike was also very valuable in helping us guide us through the process, because honestly, unless you're in the business, it's very difficult to explain the options to the board or the council or others. But fortunately, we have the experts. Tonight, I'd like to introduce Eric Fitz and Chris Byers, who are our experts. Eric lives here in Cumberland, and Chris lives in North Yarmouth, who have led the council, as Eric has, the town council, to our decision. And Chris does this professionally on a day-to-day basis, has environmentally permitted, has worked through the permitting process of solar fields throughout the state, and Eric does this professionally as well. And they are truly very well-versed in the different types of programs that are out there today, but also trying to explain the basics, because it's not running an extension cord from the solar field to the school campus. It's a lot more complex than that. And we've had, unfortunately, counselors explain it that way in public meetings. And I just remained silent. I said, maybe nobody will ask the question, is it really an extension cord? But it's not. So they'll explain a little bit more tonight. So Eric and Chris, you want to take it from here? Appreciate that.
Always backwards. There's a quick flip on this. Swap displays. There we go.
All right, now we're good. All right, thanks, Bill. I am Eric Fitz. I'm going to just give a quick background, like Bill suggested, on solar, just to orient everybody on some of the basics. Go through a few example projects, talk a little bit about some of the typical financing options, and then Chris will cover some of the additional challenges around developing solar projects like the one we're looking at. So I'm a proud Greeley grad, class of 2000. I've been living in Cumberland for most of my life. I was away for a number of years, but moved back in 2015. So really, really happy to be back here. I'm currently the CEO of Amply Energy. We help homeowners with electrification, so everything from solar to weatherization, like insulation, air sealing, heat pumps, that kind of stuff. And I previously worked with Denny Gallaudet, Jane Wilson, Bill, and the rest of the town of Cumberland on the landfill solar project that was very successful and still operating right here in town. So we've got this challenge that the district spends, around $400,000 a year on electricity, but a pretty amazing opportunity to simultaneously reduce costs and emissions with a local solar project. So what the heck is solar? How does it work? So tonight we're really talking about solar photovoltaics. This is using solar to produce electricity as opposed to solar thermal or other forms of solar energy, for example, for heating hot water. So I'm just going to talk about it as solar going forward. So it's a pretty amazing piece of technology. Sun hits the solar panels and produces DC power. There's a device called an inverter that converts that electricity into AC power. That's the type of electricity that we interact with in our homes and on the electricity grid. That gets metered by CMP and either gets used within a building or gets sent out to the electrical grid. So it's a pretty straightforward system. Major components are those panels and the inverter. So you might not think this is the case, but Cumberland actually has almost as much or slightly better solar potential than Houston. This is a map of the US and the solar intensity. So if we zoom in right here on us, we really are looking better than Houston, and we have pretty good sun, plus the fact that we have relatively high utility electricity rates makes for advantageous for solar in our area. So as part of the RFP that went out a couple of months ago, Revision Energy came back with some estimated numbers, and I'll just say again that these are estimates, and there's a lot of different pieces that need to be looked at to get to final numbers. But just as a quick comparison, a project like the one that we're talking about today would end up having a levelized cost of electricity. So think of this as like an average electricity rate over the life of the system. That's going to be 25 to 40 years of about 8 cents. That's compared to rates as of last fall. They're around 13 cents. So a little bit less than half compared to the standard offer from CMP. And then you compare that to longer term. Generally, electricity rates increase every year. In years like this, in a significant manner, far more than a 2.5% escalation rate. So, relative to where rates are today and where they are going, a local solar system is significantly less expensive. All right, so what happens at night or in the winter? This is where this policy you may have heard of called net metering comes into play. It's really a system done on the CMP bills, and it's a way to kind of manage credits and debits of electricity that's being produced. So during the day when the sun is shining, you generate a kilowatt hour of electricity that gets added to your bill credit. And then when the school district uses some electricity, let's say it's 1 kilowatt hour, it debits it from that sort of pool that's stored for later. So the idea is that over a 12-month period, a well-sized solar system will actually net out and be kind of net zero for electricity costs or energy consumption throughout the year. This is a graph from the landfill solar project. So starting on the left, fiscal year in July. So you see much higher solar production out in the summer months. less in the winter when there's also more usage, but net, you end up everything being even. All right, so we're looking at a couple of different options for a project or potentially projects for the district. Possibly a combination of rooftop solar and ground mount solar, or possibly just a single large project. So I just wanted to show a few examples of what those look like. And these are other projects that have been done by Revision throughout Maine and New Hampshire. So here's an example rooftop system. This is a good analogous type of system that might work on the middle school, which has a completely flat roof. Large project. Here's another example on a more conventional rooftop. This is up in Auburn. And then here's some examples of some ground mount systems. So this looks pretty similar to the array that's on the landfill. And here's another example of a slightly smaller system. So we're in collaboration with Revision trying to identify the most cost-effective, highest performing overall system, whether that could be a combination of rooftop, ground mount, or just one or the other. All right, so really quickly, just want to talk about typical financing options. Obviously, the cost to build a system like this is very important. So typically, there's two main options that are considered. One is direct purchase, so you could the school district could just directly pay for the system outright upfront and own it outright, or alternatively could enter into what's called a power purchase agreement and then potentially purchase the system outright later on. Power purchase agreement is when typically a third party, in this case I'm referring to as an investor, would actually own and operate the system, but then put together a contract for the district, and the district would be the sort of the sole off-taker of the electricity that's produced, the sole buyer of that electricity at a sort of a guaranteed rate over a period of time. In this particular example, this is advantageous both for the investor and for the off-taker because there are certain incentives that only the investor could take around like accelerated depreciation along with others. And it allows the school district to avoid one large upfront payment for the system and instead use other mechanisms to kind of put money aside for a future purchase. So over years 1 through 7, the school district would enter into this power purchase agreement and then have an option from that point on to purchase the system. And so like right now, the town of Cumberland, for the landfill system, will likely be purchasing the system in a couple of years, but it has the option just to continue this power purchase agreement through the life of the project if it decides it does not actually want to buy it outright. So at year 7, the district could buy it, and this would be at a significant discount to the original system cost, and then would effectively have quote unquote free electricity for the rest of the life of the system. So the option B, this sort of combination of a power purchase agreement for the first 7 years and then having this direct purchase option at year 7 is exactly the approach that we recommended and what the town elected for the landfill project. All right, Chris, talk about other challenges.
Good job. Hi, my name's Chris Byers. I live in North Yarmouth and have been working in the solar industry for about 13, 14 years. I own Branch Renewable Energy, which is a development and consulting firm solely focused on renewable energy development in Maine. I've worked on probably 100 different projects across the state, all fairly large-scale ground mount projects, everywhere from, I don't know. I'm trying to think as far as Sanford all the way up to like Presque Isle. So I do a lot of driving. The state of Maine has seen an incredible amount of growth in the solar industry in the last 3 years. Really, since 2019, policy has changed so much, not just in 2019, but even along the way. And I bring that up because I think our lawmakers are trying to keep pace with something that is growing very fast. In some ways, we've accomplished our goals because we've proliferated solar across the state. But at the same time, I think some folks are also thinking about how do we regulate this better? How do we maybe adjust our expectations about how municipalities, schools, hospitals, ratepayers alike can benefit? So, from a policy standpoint, it's important to have a good partner to help navigate that. So I actually had considered participating in the bid myself with projects that I'm working on, but decided to step back from that as a resident of North Yarmouth and saying, I think I can probably be more effective here by not having to recuse myself, because clearly that would have had to have happened. I wouldn't be speaking to you here today. So I have no interest financially in the project, but decided to just take on the volunteer role. And I think it's important to have good partners. And I'm not saying that actually about myself. I'm really saying that more about Revision. So Fortunat Mueller is a good friend of mine, great guy. He's been doing solar his whole life. And we were really excited to work with Revision on this because everything that Eric talked about, it's a lot, right? You all get it, right? Totally easy to absorb, totally, right? Ready? It's a lot. So what's important is we try to figure out options and how we figure out how best to do this, whether it's cost, whether it's where we put it, and how we navigate those policies. We just need to have a good partner working through that. So that's really why it was about a request for qualifications and not so much a request for a proposal, because we need to just start from a very simple standpoint of saying who's on the team. So now that we've got our roster figured out, we want to move forward and navigate things like permitting. I actually don't feel too worried about permitting because there are ways of finding the right project, whether it's addressing environmental sensitivities, view shed issues, but just where the project goes really matters. The interconnection, I think, is the most challenging part of this. And CMP, as well as Versant, have in many ways maybe been vilified, but I'm not sure that it's really fair to say that they're the villains in this because they've been thrown an enormous task of trying to plug in all these big solar projects into an already incredibly complicated grid that we operate here in Maine that was built in, the 1700s. So the interconnection is challenging. And what I mean, I've just kind of cut to the chase. Likely it's going to take probably 24 to 30 months from the time you submit an interconnection application to the time that project is online and operating. So that's a long time to wait. And along the way, there's a lot of boogeymans that can get you. So whether that's maybe something on the environmental side, maybe it's a cost that you didn't expect from CMP. There's so much that goes into this. So I deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And we're prepared to, I think, probably be a conduit between Revision and the board as we learn more information and to present that, and also to answer questions from the public. I live in this district, and I have a financial interest in seeing this be a good move for us. Different than purchasing a very expensive school, this is something where we're hoping we don't have to put up a lot of money up front, and that we're actually going to lean on the pocketbooks of investors to help handle the major financial load of this. So lots of challenges to talk about. I could keep talking, but just wanted to make sure that you understand kind of who the roster is and who's working on this, as well as some of the challenges that we're really focused on. I think the students can probably talk about the happier part of this. Feel like I've been a little bit of a Debbie Downer here. So hopefully they're going to talk about why this is great and important, but figured I'd help share some of those technical challenges that we face. And I'm supposed to introduce somebody. Now, Peter, you're going to come out, I think, introduce your crew, right?
Hi, I'm Peter Scott. I'm co-advisor of the Greeley Climate Action Team, and this year we combined with the Global Awareness Club. And that's run by Julie Dowdy. And I also recruited our esteemed science teacher, Mr. Bloom, to help us out. So tonight I'm representing from the adult perspective, but I'm going to turn it right over to our students to share with you some of their thoughts about solar and to talk a little bit about our work in the school on that. So I will dial up the presentation and turn it over to Jack. Maybe each student can introduce themselves first and then do their piece. So Jack, you want to pop on up?
Hello. My name is Jack Gervais. I'm a student here at Greeley High School. I'm a senior. And I'm part of the Greeley Climate Action Team, and we've combined this year with the Global Awareness Club, as Mr. Scott said, and we're really, really excited about this new project, and we're really hoping that we can continue to move forward with it because we think there's a lot of great opportunities, not just for the town and for the school as a whole, both financially and, you know, the greater environmental impact of solar energy. But we think it's a really good opportunity for student involvement and student learning. And we think that student involvement in a project like this can lead to a lot of good things. And we actually did a student survey for people's thoughts on this new project. So I'm going to turn it over to some other members of our clubs to talk about that.
We noticed a surprising amount of students responding, saying that they learned less about climate change and sustainability in high school. In middle school, it is certainly important that students have a basic understanding of climate change, but in high school, it is important that students understand how we can tackle this global issue individually. Classes that cover climate change include IB Geography, IB Biology, Global Citizenship, and Oceanography. We hope that students will become more educated and aware of climate change, but we also want them to be empowered to take action. Implementing steps such as solar power, composting, etc. can set an example for the student body.
Hi, so I'm Maddie, and I'm here to talk about the student survey that we sent out. So we created a survey for the students at our school, with the students having no knowledge that a plan was being implemented for solar panels. And when having to choose the first choice of action, 35.4% of students chose solar power or renewable energy. When asked to choose the second choice, 18.1% listed it as their second choice. And when asked to choose their third, 17.1% listed it as their third, which shows that a large majority of the students support a solar plan for our school.
Okay, so it's clear that a lot of students really care about solar energy, even without knowledge of the project, which a lot of students don't know about this project because it's in its early stages and we hope it can continue. But we think as it hopefully does continue in a very productive and efficient way, that we can start to incorporate and allow students to become more aware and even involved in this project because we're students at the school which this project would be powering. So, and especially in the future, which involves, hopefully continues to involve more and more solar energy, as members of these clubs, we think it's important for students to be aware of this infrastructure in our own local community, as opposed to learning about it in a different school in the state or in a different state or a different country. It's happening here, and we think that's a great opportunity for students to learn more about it, become more engaged with it. And yeah, you want to read?
Bouncing off of that, the data from this project could be used in various curriculums, such as that of IB Geography. And as Jack said, the exposure to this information is going to be so much more effective than really anything you can teach. Like offering hands-on opportunities to see how it's directly working is so much more impactful than just hearing about it.
And so we care, and we care because not only do we agree that this is the perfect time for a solar farm project to be undertaken, but because our clubs directly advocate for student involvement. And that's why we're here tonight, because we just want to show the student involvement, the student awareness of this project, and how much we care about it, like how much we want to be involved in it, how much we want to support it. We want to advocate for student involvement and awareness into environmental projects such as this one. and we think it could provide student education not just on why solar panel is a great future for us, but how financially this type of infrastructure can work and be put in place. And so as with our clubs this year, we want to continue to sort of advocate for awareness, because a lot of students don't, as we've shown with the survey, a lot of students don't actually know this is currently happening. We think the more people that know, the better it's going to work out for everyone, the better it's going to work out for the students, and hopefully the more we can sort of drive this project forward as we continue with it. So, thank you.
Zach, are you ready? All right. Zach Bouchard would just like to say something as part of our community representative on the committee.
Hi, thank you. My name is Zach Bouchard. I have 2 children in the district. I'm speaking today in support of the proposal to install enough solar capacity to satisfy all the electricity consumption of our school. There are many reasons to move forward, which you've already heard tonight. I'll briefly discuss the 3 most important arguments. 1, we're a school district that prides itself in being one of the highest ranked in the state. We are teaching some of the best and brightest math and science students in Maine, who thankfully showed up tonight. And the math and science is pretty clear on climate change, and we should be doing everything we can to acknowledge that and respond in a swift manner. If we didn't move forward with this, it feels a bit hypocritical to teach our kids math and science while at the same time not listening to math and science. We also have a moral imperative to our children, our towns, and the planet to stop our unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions. We are currently leaving our children with a planet that will quickly become uninhabitable for them if we do not curb our pollution. I want our children to know that we care about them and their future. I want to live in a school district that is looked at as a leader on this issue, and I want to show the rest of the state why it's important to be on the right side of history. Other school districts have done this, and I think many other school districts will follow our lead on this. And finally, if the math and science and moral imperative isn't enough, then I think the last, or what we've already talked about tonight, should resonate with everyone in the community, and that we need to stop wasting our money. For many years now, solar has been a much cheaper option to service our electrical needs. My family put solar panels on our first home in 2013 because at that time it was much cheaper than paying CMP. And then when we bought our home in Cumberland, we again immediately put solar panels on our home because of, the cost savings were even better. And it just keeps getting that way as CMP keeps increasing their rates. So this project has the potential to save our municipality and thus our local taxpayers. Some of the numbers, initial numbers say, $5 to $10 million over the course of this project. And that could potentially go up if CMP's rates keep going up at the rate they are. So I think this is not a difficult decision. We can either continue to waste our money, pollute the planet, ignore our children's future, or we could be on the right side of history and save a bunch of money in the process. And given the 2 options, I think it would be pretty reckless and an utter waste of our money and knowledge not to move forward with this. And one more note, I realize that procuring land and getting the permits to make this happen will take some time. I think in the meantime, we should work on covering our school rooftops that are eligible, that can be done sort of in a more swift manner. To begin getting our tax savings earlier, and that will cover a portion of our electricity needs. And I also think not only would that save our money, but to sort of back up what the students are saying, if the students are actually seeing solar panels being put on the school, I think that resonates a lot with sort of how we think about their future and the importance of it. And I think that will just generate a lot of questions and a lot of involvement, which I think could be a really, really great thing. That's all. Thank you so much for all your hard work and your time.
Nice job, Zach. So I think what I should have started with was first, thank you, because last summer we all got together. Some of you weren't here, most of you were, but we got together as a group collaboratively, the town of North Yarmouth, the town of Cumberland, and the board here, and said, make it happen. Tell us how we get there. Tell us what's the next step. And that's what tonight I forwarded the 2 proposals to Superintendent Porter, so the board would have those as well. But that's where we are tonight. Tonight isn't a decision point, but tonight is an information point that we've taken this as far as we can. We want to continue to assist you, but we're at a point now where we strongly believe you're going to need one of the experts, and we believe that is Revision Energy. We believe there are opportunities for the future, and that'll have to be decided by staff and the challenges that you have in your budget year ahead of you. Is this the right time to look at the rooftop units? I believe you will gain some benefit out of that, and financing could be as simple as another energy bond through the state that can be offset by the cost you're paying for electricity today. So that's how we did it at the town, and it was very, very simple. So we're here to help. We're here to help Jeff and Scott get to the next step, and we're also here to be a resource for you, because you're dealing with a contractor who obviously has financial interests as well, but this is kind of unique where they are also part of your SAD and they're part of our community. When you hear the presentations by the students tonight, awesome job, just awesome job. I'm just cheering in the front row saying, yeah, come down to the council meeting, help me with some other things. So you guys did a great job tonight. I really appreciated it. And I also get excited because, 22, 23 years ago, Eric Fitz was sitting in a classroom at Greeley High School, and now he's here in front of you basically designing and helping present a solar option, which he did very successfully in one town council meeting. So he came one meeting, and the next meeting we voted and said, yes, we can't disagree with Eric, so we won't move forward. And Denny was there just to be the enforcer. So we really appreciate the talent we have in this community. I've said so many times, and I will say it again tonight, our kids get a private school education at a public school price. I mean, our teachers, our administrators, the boards do a phenomenal job with our kids, and I'm just so proud to be a member of this 30-year resident of the town of Cumberland after hearing presentations tonight, because our future is very bright if we've got young minds like this in the room that are ready to take and help, and I'm sure they'll be up there assembling the panels with us as well. So I'm very excited about the future, and we are here to help. The experts, especially these 2 behind me, can help answer most of your questions, and we just want to be part of the next step. So we understand this is only a presentation. There's no action by the board tonight, but I just wanted to make clear to the public that you have been all in since the go. So we have all been doing this together, and we were just helping you while you were kind of monopolized with that other project that we won't talk about. But we're going to move forward with this one because I think it is the right thing to do, and I think you will see that it does make sense for the district, but it does take time, and all these things do take a little bit of time. So we're here to help, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, questions from the board, basic ones? Avery, go for it.
Yeah, so how much would the district be cutting from its carbon footprint by going forward with the solar project?
So we don't have exact numbers right now, but that's something we'll definitely present in the coming months once we have more details about the project and the timing of the project. And so the actual emissions that we're offsetting change over time as the emission mix of the grid changes.
All right.
The last count was around 20%. The electricity was 20% of the district's total carbon.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not going to, it's going to power approximately 20% of the district?
No. It would reduce 20% of the overall carbon emissions.
Okay.
Other emissions are school bus exhaust and heating.
Right. So from experience, about how large does this solar project need to be to power the district?
I think we're working with a 2 megawatt size project here for really, really round numbers. Are you talking about physical size, or are you talking about, like, what do you mean by size?
Yeah, like how large is
the
it?
land area, you mean?
Yeah.
12 to 20.
Wow.
Yep. Now, that would be a lot less if some of that was sprinkled on the roof as well. So that figure is to say if we did nothing on the rooftops. So
I have a question that connects to mine. The memo from Mr. Shane said 20% could go on the rooftops, perhaps. So regarding where the other 12 plus acres would come from, is that land we have? Is that land identified? Is that land we have to purchase? I'm sorry, I have to ask. Pardon?
We still have that land option in North Yarmouth, so.
So
Too soon?
that we can certainly look at that. It would be
There's
a
that,
nice
yeah.
way to use that, some of that extra land. There's a lot of obstacles, including the substation and interconnect. So, but that is certainly something we should explore.
I want to point out too that the priority is to site a project within the local area.
So you're talking Cumberland only?
Cumberland or North Yarmouth, because it
Okay.
services both towns.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be. That's why I'm saying that second. But on a technical basis, as long we are all CMP territory, so as long as the project is sited within CMP territory and interconnected to the CMP grid, anybody can benefit. So Greenville, they're CMP. They could actually benefit from a project in Cumberland and vice versa. That being said, a lot of the student input here, I think, would mean a lot if it was local, right? It would be a place that you could do a field trip, you could have your hands on it a little bit more, and you could see how weather patterns looking out the window affect that solar project that's also just down the street. So from a siting standpoint, Revision can also be, they're going to play a role in that. They have certainly a huge cache of customers and opportunities and are familiar with who's interested in this. The tricky thing with this area in southern Maine is that land is typically pretty expensive. So a lot of the work that I do is in central Maine, northern Maine, down east, where land is not as expensive in Cumberland. So that's a challenge for us that we need to overcome. But finding the right site is very, very important.
So I have a question based off that. I know some corporations right now have a surplus, and I'm not quite understanding. They built the grid and now they have a surplus. Have we looked into purchasing just the surpluses from all of these solar farms instead of going down the road of building our own?
Gotcha. Right. So
like Shaw Brothers right now has a surplus that they either sell back to CMP or they donate to nonprofits.
I don't know about that. I'm not sure about the surplus thing, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that a lot of the projects that I work on and others in the industry, they build the project and then they find people to subscribe to them, and they're just signing up to save 15%. We all get those flyers in the mail, right?
Mm-hmm.
You probably just throw them in the trash like I do because they're annoying, but that's why it's good to kind of have some options. I guess another option, which is a little sort of less exciting, is just simply to sign up and subscribe, but that removes itself from the tangible benefit of having this project a lot more closer to us in that.
Yeah, just cost effective wise, I know there's a lot of surplus that's out there.
Yeah.
And have we weighed those benefits?
I would imagine
if Cumberland has a surplus on their already existing solar farm.
You have a surplus of
cash. A surplus of kilowatts, okay. You're using all the kilowatts. And with this project, this is the second, would we have enough of a surplus? So there's like two questions. Can we purchase surpluses and save a lot of money? Or if we do this project, is there going to be a surplus with the size of this project?
I think what we're describing here and what you're describing is that you want to buy discount power, right? You want to buy power that's readily available, that's at low cost. And what Eric described in that power purchase agreement model is effectively that. The challenge that I see from maybe choosing from like Shaw Brothers or others and then having to find them is that first, that's a lot of moving pieces and probably a complicated contract. And two, not sure how to even find those people. But in the end, we're just buying the power, right, at a lower cost. And so what Eric described is a power purchase agreement that would be an investor coming in, paying for the cost of building the project, doing all the permitting, spending the millions of dollars to just get this thing to be operational, and then in turn selling discount power to the district. So we're effectively doing that, but with one project in a very simple kind of sole-sourced way. there's certainly so many ways to be creative in this industry, but I think this is what we are recommending as the most clean path to having as much of a transparent process as possible, and also the fastest path to success. Because Eric and I do this a lot, we see this as incredibly viable.
But there is surpluses out there.
I just want to say, so I'm not aware of the Shaw Brothers surplus. That certainly there are some out there. I would call that an anomaly. Like almost every project that's built, they are way oversubscribed. So there's way more demand than there is supply. It is technically possible to share the benefit of a solar system with multiple parties, but I think that's really as far as I'm seeing, whether on the residential or commercial utility level, the general best practice is you design the system to meet specific demand. So the project that we're looking at with revision, it's sized exactly to meet, to match 100% of the electricity loads of the district. Because if you way oversize it, you then have to figure out how to deal with this surplus, which is a whole complicated issue that's generally avoided in the industry. So you try to match the system size.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of investors right now that are actually building solar farms to be bigger, and then they can donate to nonprofits and have a tax benefit with that. So that's why I was looking at the surplus option for the district instead of the upfront cost. As you can see, we've got a lot of costs coming down the road.
Right. So usually when they do that, they will plan the system. We'll have a off-taker like a nonprofit or another school or already set up in advance. It's rarely done and where you kind of figure it out after the fact, unless you're one of these companies that Chris talked about, where they're specifically selling to consumers generally on a subscription basis, where you only get 15% of the sort of discount relative to the CMP rate. Whereas if we own the system and we're the sole off-taker, we get 100% of the financial benefits. So we completely eliminate the 99% of the electric bill as opposed to a portion.
Okay. And when are do we have numbers?
Eric, could you talk about a little bit like what the costs would look like year 1 through 7, and then if we bought the system, and then I'm assuming we got to pay off a bond, for the next 6 years or something, and then what it looks like. So what's that chart look like? Obviously, we're getting a discount at the beginning, then a big payment, and then we get our payback. Right? Is that how it would look roughly? Or?
Yeah, sure. So there's I don't have the cash flow charts on me right now. We definitely will have those in the coming weeks. The one chart that I showed where it was the levelized cost of electricity, so in the very rough proposal that Revision put together as part of the RFQ, it was about 8 cents per kilowatt hour relative to the current CMP rates of about 13 cents. And then in terms of, so the way it works with the power purchase agreement is that there's no upfront cost for the school district for those first 7 years. You just are buying electricity at a lower rate through this contract. And then at year 7, you actually would purchase the system. So roughly speaking, again, from the RFQ, we're talking about like a $6 to $9 million cost for the investor to purchase and own the system. And then there's a 30 to 40% discount that the district would have the option to purchase the system at year 7 relative to that initial cost.
Okay. So $6 million, and our typical costs at that point, depending on inflation or whatever, might be $450,000 a year. So looking at $14 or 14 years or so to pay off, and then everything truly is free from then on, right?
So you could, payback period. So typically for residential systems, payback around here is 7 to 9 years. For a bigger system with larger economies of scale, could be better than that. But it's somewhere in the 7 to 10 year range, most likely.
And Bill, how did the town do it as far as paying for that lump cost?
Well, each year we're putting aside, our system's much less expensive. It's about 1/6 of the size of yours. So our bills are around $100,000 a year, not $400,000. So, but the size of the system, what we do is basically we have been budgeting just like we would for electricity costs every year, and that goes into a reserve fund to help offset this. And we also have been paying 1/6 of the cost of the potential agreement each year to a reserve fund that we set aside. And we're approaching, I think, year 3 or year 4. So by the time the investor tax credits go away, we'll be able to walk in, and then we'll be buying our electricity basically produced right from the field. We get bills every month from CMP, and it takes a vendor like Revision to help us understand them, because they too have been new at this, and this billing system is all new to the whole state because it changed last year. And now we're getting paid for the kilowatts instead of getting credited kilowatt for kilowatt. And now I'm able to pay demand charges, service charges, everything with that, because of essentially what we believe is a windfall of electrical costs now. We're still in this 7 or 8 cent range, and everybody else is going to be much higher than that very shortly. So. And Mike, jump in any time, because you were involved with the whole process as well, and you do this at a much higher level than us. So I think we're heading to a place where we need to act sooner rather than later, because things, I think the way Chris explained it, things can change on a dime, and I don't want to be left out in the cold because we didn't act soon enough. And I think that's why you're feeling a little bit more sense of urgency than perhaps a year ago when we presented.
So for years, obviously beyond like year 15 or 20, whatever, everything really is kind of free when the field is paid off, when it's ours. But from up to that point, when the bond is paid off, the way that the town did it, was there a net increase in cost in any given year, or while you were accumulating that reserve? And then after that, was your bond payment in a given year actually more than you would have spent on electricity anyway? Like, what is that?
Well, there's no bond payment on our end. We're just setting aside cash at the end of each year to basically go toward the purchase of that. And I don't know, Jeff, if you guys can do that or not. You guys are very restricted for the type of reserve funds you can have. And that's a stretch to say this is a fuel fund, but it is a fuel fund technically. But I think that's the challenge with school finance and municipal finance. We're allowed to set it aside in a reserve. So we were able to not have a bond at the end of the tax credit cycle for the investors. So we'll be paying cash for that. I think it's $680,000, $700,000 for that. We'll have set aside that over the 6 years, and we'll give them a check, and we'll own the field, and then our payback begins. You know, the electricity essentially would be free in the sense that we don't foresee an electrical bill that'll exceed the revenues that we have in our credit column, like Eric showed us. But might be some costs. What I don't want you to forget, though, is that you're continuing to be a CMP customer. So you're still basically out there, and you still have to worry about, you know, the hot days of summer and all those things. You're still a CMP customer, but when your bills come in, they'll basically show you how much you owe, and it's based on how many credits you've accumulated versus, you know, what you've used in power to date. So we're doing very well in the summer months, not so great in the winter months. We still have to pay some bills occasionally, but at the end of the year, we pretty much net out. Last year, I think it was $5,000 or $6,000 to the good. So we're doing okay on our end, and we got lucky. You're in a system that's already laid out for you in a much better way, in a more positive way. But as these guys shared, we just don't know what the legislative climate will be next year or the year after, and that's what kind of scares us a little bit.
I have a follow-up question to that. First, I want to thank you bringing the two communities together and the expertise that we have. We're very fortunate, so thank you. And then the students, it's such a great opportunity to, you know, have the learning done here together. And with the board, I know I'm learning a lot. So from the policy perspective, do we think there may be incentives to help schools and districts looking to explore these types of projects? Is that something that might be coming on the horizon? I know the financing piece is huge.
There's currently federal tax credits that cover at least 30% of the cost, and potentially more, depending on the content of the panels themselves and how it's installed. But the federal tax incentive is quite good. So it's another, to Bill's point about taking advantage of this now, getting at least 30% of that cost taken care of by the federal government. In terms of state incentives, I will defer to Eric. and Chris, in terms of directly supporting schools, I don't think there's anything right now. Nor, yeah.
Yeah, there's the main incentive in Maine, no pun intended, is this net metering policy, or net energy billing is really how it's referred to by CMP and by the Public Utility Commission. There's possibly some mechanisms through other nonprofits to provide financing, but honestly, the rates that the district can already get for its own cost of capital is so low that I'm not sure it would really be advantageous. But there are potentially other financing partners outside of what Revision can directly access that potentially the district could access. Okay. But I wanted to sort of comment. This is actually relevant to what you were just saying, and also we were talking about with Bill just a few moments ago about how does this PPA work and the financing options. We selected Revision because they have experience with dozens of schools across the state of Maine, and they've seen every flavor of situation within a district like ours that's split across multiple towns within a single town entity. So they will help us navigate a lot of these different types of questions, and they've really seen it all across the state.
And since we're all a lot of the districts in this area are part of CMP, I'm just curious, and they would probably know this, like if you're building a large array, that it seems like the more opportunities there are for others to go in together. I don't know if they've ever seen districts partner. I know that gets that could get more complicated, but it does seem like there could be some potential there.
It's technically possible, but it often doesn't play out that way because when you get the multiple parties, there's even more cooks in the kitchen to try to make decisions, and but it's certainly possible.
And then there seems like there's a pathway around being able to put panels on top of buildings. That's a little quicker timeline than the longer term array field. And I don't know if I don't know what next steps are to actually move this forward, but if there's two options where there's a shorter term one where we could consider something that would be a quicker return because we have the tops of buildings versus needing to secure.
Yeah, rooftop is definitely a quicker option. Really the main question there, when we started looking at some of this a number of years ago, is just the age of the roof in different parts of the different buildings. So typically you want to have a system put in on a very old roof, which makes sense. So that's kind of the key technical question that we'll need to dig into.
Great.
I had a question about the financing, but if you're going to answer,
I wanted to answer Leanne's question real quick also. So I'm trying to remember two things. One was you were asking about schools working together. If we were Athens, Maine, that might be a possibility, but we are not. We are very large, and part of the problem with the current policy with working with the PUC is that you really are kind of capped at 2 megawatts with the size of projects. So we're pushing right up against that cap. So we don't really have a lot of room to share at this point. Thankfully, that magic number kind of works for what the cap is and what the district needs. That's just coincidence. In terms of other policy advantages, you were asking about, what can we take advantage of? What programs are there out there? So the Inflation Reduction Act had a huge carve out for solar stuff. And Mike was alluding to this earlier by saying that 30% is your minimum federal tax credit. But they have now, this is totally different. I mean, they've now added these different tiers. So you can get more federal tax credit if you're using domestic content, which means like the steel racking is made in the US, or you have equipment that's assembled and made in the US. And there's really not a lot of rulemaking that's come out about exactly how we define that. If something's shipped in and then assembled, is that domestic content? So they have the federal government hasn't really done a great job. I know. I hope you promise. So in addition to that, though, you can get another 10% for working with having some low-income off-takers, so purchasers of it, or also having an apprenticeship program. So that is another box that Revision can check because they have a whole apprenticeship program. So they may actually be pushing 40+%. That's another really good reason to work with a partner that's saving us hundreds of thousands of dollars just simply because they have that program baked into their business. So those are all the things that Fortunat and others are keeping their thumb on. Really hard to say how it's all going to shake out, but it's great news that we didn't really have 9 months ago. That's totally going to help the district out. Yeah, I can't remember the second thing, but you had a financing question.
Yeah,
maybe
I guess
this
a
is
couple,
your-
but I want to just make sure I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. And so for the first 7 years, from a cash flow perspective for the district, essentially an outside investor puts up the money, so there's no initial check written by the community. Then we buy power from that investor, essentially. And because the solar power is so much cheaper, we actually pay less than we would have paid to CMP, at least at current rates.
Yep, that's right.
And then that amount we pay is enough to pay for the power plus the cost of financing so that the investor gets a return.
You potentially could. So it's pretty amazing. So on day one, you're cash flow positive, which is fantastic. You could elect, and like the town has, and I don't know about the technical details within the bylaws and rules around setting aside funds. You could, with that windfall of savings you have for those 7 years, you could put aside that cash to then, help purchase the system at year 7 if you want.
Okay. So for the first 7 years, so far we've just made money, essentially.
Exactly.
At year 7, we have a choice if we want to buy the system.
Yep.
Or continue to buy,
Yep.
to just buy power at a discounted rate to what we're paying today.
That's right. That's right. And that option continues every single year for the life of the contract. So you could choose to just continue to do the PPA for 30 years. And
then if rates are similar to where they are today or higher, I'm guessing you could pretty easily float a bond or something like that to buy the system.
Sure. Yep.
Because your savings after you own it would more than cover the interest payments and the debt service.
Totally. So yeah, it's very often for residential projects, you take your current electricity costs, you then have some kind of debt service, and you still have a little bit of savings relative to what you were, previously paying. So yeah, especially with, a bond where you can get, really low cost of capital, it's a good chance that you would be in a really good setup for the school district.
So from an economic standpoint, the biggest risk is that electric rates from CMP go down so much that you would have been better off continuing to buy from CMP.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like is the word no-brainer, is that the right word from
Yes,
an
I
economic
think
standpoint?
so.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
I just want to make sure I'm not missing something.
Yeah, but this is like one of the amazing things about solar is it's a hedge against the price volatility. So you can actually plan for the next 40 years of what your costs will be.
Okay. I'm just making sure. I mean, I appreciate Chris covering the risks, but it almost sounded like you're underselling it from an economic standpoint, because it seems like a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer, yep.
I guess just from a environmental standpoint, one criticism I've heard of solar is that when people talk about the savings on carbon emissions after they're operational, but when you factor in what is undertaken to extract the materials to make the solar, I mean, apparently these Caterpillar trucks are about the size of this room, and you burn a lot of diesel fuel to get all the materials. And then something has to happen with recycling when at the end of the useful life to make sure that chemicals aren't bleeding into the ground and so forth. That's a criticism I've heard. I don't need to hear all the details, but could you just tell me at a high level, do you believe that the savings you get in terms of carbon emissions over the life of the solar panels more than makes up for this carbon cost of producing them and so forth?
Absolutely. I think Chris wants to say something, but there's been tons of studies done on this. The carbon payback is usually on the order of a year or two. There's been life cycle studies been done for many years now on systems. So it's a very quick payback on whatever all the emissions associated with manufacturing, shipping, the local emissions for assembling and using the machines on site, like lots of detailed studies on this, and there's absolutely a very rapid carbon payback. Chris, do you want to say something else?
Yeah, there are consulting firms. There's a consulting firm for everything that specialize in doing this analysis, and it's all about everything. It's, we're cutting down trees, but then we're planting grass. What about carbon sequestration of trees versus like a meadow condition? Where did the panels come from? How far do the workers need to drive? There's a lot of levers to pull when you talk about impact. So we had done this on one project down in Connecticut. It was like a 200-acre project where most of the project had trees being cut down, and they kind of gave like an earth payback. Like we keep talking about a return on investment when it talks about ROI, but when you talk about like the earth payback, which I think is what you're getting at, it was like 7 to 8 years. So, and that also factored into that is that the solar is beneficial, right? So we're not just measuring impact, we're also measuring the positive outcomes of having solar energy by avoiding polluting types of generation. So it just depends. Probably wouldn't recommend that we go forward and do that, but that might actually be kind of a cool project for students to dig into at like a pretty advanced level. I mean, start Googling it and start figuring it out. That's a really cutting edge part of the industry that isn't really mature. And so maybe that's a way that students can kind of dig into that. But I can rest assure you that has been looked at, and certainly it's been a criticism, and it's one that I hear constantly at planning board meetings. And I'm glad you asked it, because it's a really good point to bring up.
It is. If I could just jump in really quick, it is a good point, Jared. There's also just
a question, not a point.
Question. Well, a point made via question. The point about supply chains, though, I think it's important to note that the supply chain of panels, of photovoltaic solar panels, is diversifying, and it's diversifying quickly, where if we had this discussion 5 to 10 years ago, most of the panels would be coming from China, and a lot of the materials would be coming from China, and the production of the polysilicon under unregulated processes is significantly polluting. That's not the case anymore. The supply chains have expanded and shifted globally. A lot of Southeast Asia still, but some in Africa and other places, but also expanding in North America and South America. There's been massive investments in First Solar. First Solar is a company in Ohio that's making solar panels, also for other parts of the panels that are coming from different places and being looked at by organizations like CDP and others who look at the embodied emissions associated with goods, and showing that the emissions that are created as part of making solar power and solar panels is dropping. So that's also a good story.
From a recycling standpoint too, so there's a cool website called solarrecycle.org, I think. And so this is like a boutique industry that's starting to form. We didn't really need to have solar panel recycling 10 years ago, but now we do, because we're seeing, hey, in 10 to 20 years, maybe some of those older projects are going to start to need to be decommissioned, and what are we going to do with them? So this is a new industry that's showing up. So solarrecycle.org shows like different vendors in the Northeast that are starting to form, and you can kind of source those initially. This system will be operational for 40 to 50 years before that's even an issue, but it is an important part of this where we think, hey, there's some components to these that probably could be extracted and reused for other components and other technology. So it's a growing part of the industry.
So I heard from Eric, and I think I heard from Chris and Mike, but what I heard was, yes, the carbon, the reduced carbon emissions from operating the solar panels more than makes up for the emissions that are given off in forming them, and that equation is getting better over time.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah.
So when building these projects, how much of future electricity consumption is accounted for? Like, say, if we built a new school.
Yeah, this is meant to cover existing. And part of the challenge with overbuilding a project is that you're kind of building something where energy is then just wasted. You really want to build it and know what, an investor is going to put up a lot of money. They're going to want to know, how is every little unit of energy going to be sold at the end? Mm-hmm. So it's very much not a part of the model to have a surplus. So I think our charge as the committee was to decouple existing energy needs with the potential for a new school. That being said, I'm sure that this will come up, and it's certainly something that we can participate in when we look at how to design that school so that it's a brand new roof, right? So you avoid all those issues, but how to avoid it by, where do you put the air handling equipment? How do you maybe add a little bit pitch to roofs and optimize for a solar opportunity? So. Really good questions. This is great.
Others?
I feel like my old teaching job here.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much to everybody. Bill, so I've been loosely involved with this committee, and I understand the recommendation of revision is just that, a recommendation, which I'm on board with. So what do you see next steps from here?
Oh, I do think that we're going to have to sit down with the superintendent and the business manager and just kind of work out help work out a proposal for the board to contractually get into an agreement with revision, if that's the direction the board wants to go. I know that you just received those proposals this morning, so it'll give you a chance to look at both of them if you'd like and dig into them a little bit more. But I think when you get to the end, I think the work with the districts throughout the state is going to be a big influence on your, hopefully, same decision. But that would be the next step. And then revision can start putting together a plan, working with the towns. And I'm serious about working with the towns. And we want to see this located in one of the two towns. And if that can happen, that can happen. We are working pretty aggressively with a local landowner that does want to see this happen. If we can get to the same place, that'll work. But that's where revision's expertise comes in and says, well, this is how much we can pay to lease land instead of purchase it in the town and still make this a viable option for the district. And that's their expertise. It's not ours, and I can't ask these guys to do that for free. So I think we continue to work in that direction. I don't think there are any big investments at this point. I think the next big question would be, you know, what kind of shape are the roofs in? Are they able to handle these panels, or is it, are we going to, cart before the horse? Should the roofs get redone first before you put panels on, so you don't have to take the panels on when the panels off when the roofs have to be redone? It's really a capital management standpoint that really we're going to need Scott and his team and the building team here to be involved with as well. So I think you can get there pretty quickly. I think the easy step is revision, and that helps them get started in the whole process of the larger field, because you just don't have enough roof area to handle the whole campus for power.
Can I add to that, though? I guess it would be a question for you two. My understanding is it's not necessarily a choice just between putting it on a roof or putting it on land and having to clear it or whatever, but also a lot of, like France, they're putting them over parking lots, and we do have a lot of student parking and such. So is that something that would be something we could consider as well?
Yeah, it's definitely an option. Revision has experience doing rooftop parking, at grade parking. It's certainly an option. It tends to be a little bit more expensive than doing rooftop or doing like a open field, but it's certainly an option and makes a lot of sense given that we're going to have more and more electric vehicles parking. There's other benefits to having it sited right there in the parking area.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So next step, we need to commit to one of the two companies that put this forward, right? Is it reasonable, Jeff, Bill, to give the board a couple of weeks and then we make that decision at the next board meeting? Does that sound?
Yeah, I guess we'll be in touch with Bill. Scott and I will be, and see what the best step forward would be to bring it back to the board, and what would need to be the next step.
But next step, we need to choose one so we can start asking more pointed questions, right?
I think what revision will do would be some type of MOU or actually a contractual agreement, because you're not building anything yet. You're still in that first exploratory phase, working with the district, working to find out which path they would like to go down. They have been pretty clear, because of the obligations we have in front of us as our communities here, that they would like to see the lowest cost option available for the foreseeable future. So and we've expressed that to both Amoresco and to Revision, and that's Revision came back with a pretty aggressive proposal. So I think, yes, there's not any outlay of cash at this point that you have to spend a $50,000 contract on for hiring them. It's really to get you to the next steps of net metering, power purchase agreements, those type of things. And you hit it right on the head. I mean, it took us a couple years, and it was a pretty simple process. There are more people getting in line to make this thing happen, so that's why the process has slowed down a little bit, and probably is going to be 30 to 36 months.
Would you guys be able to come back at the next meeting if we had more questions, just to get to that spot? Yeah. Okay.
Said yes.
Sorry, quick question for Eric or Chris. In the other school projects in which there was an immediate net savings to the school, did that include, and these were PPAs, did the investor also buy the land or lease the land? Is that factored into that, an upfront cost?
It's 9 times out of 10, it's a lease. And if it's an option to buy, it's because the landowner is probably thinking about selling. So it's typically not even what an investor will lead with, like, hey, I want to buy your land. It's just a lot easier to just lease it. Landowners typically like that because they retain ownership of the land. So if the project is decommissioned and taken out, they can still build, their grandkids can still build a home on it or something. So.
Okay, so the immediate net savings was even after, it was after buying the electricity, covering the financing, and covering that lease cost, and there was still a net savings.
Yes, right. All the costs that Eric talked about, that kind of levelized cost of energy, includes all of those ancillary costs along the way.
Great, thank you.
So I'm thinking our assignment for the next 2 weeks is to digest those 2 packets and then come back at the next meeting with questions, concerns, thoughts about options, and then hopefully we can choose one of the 2 at that point. Sound good? Okay.
I was just going to add the one key question that I mentioned that would be helpful to know sooner rather than later is this question around the rooftop age. We were just guessing based on satellite photos of what how old they were. So that's something that once we had that information, revision can turn around pretty quickly, at least on the rooftop potential and possible associated costs with doing just the rooftop as opposed to the ground mount.
Okay. Homework for Scott.
Ask a question about that really quickly.
I have that down as a question mark.
Okay. Any other members of the public want to comment on this? Go for it. Step up if you would, please.
Hey, I'm Graham Shove. I teach IB geography here at the high school and a few other classes. My question, I guess nobody asked, I was just wondering about net metering. I feel like the project would hinge on net metering. It hinges on net metering, right? Is there any risk to net metering in Maine because it's only a couple years old, right?
There's been a net metering policy in Maine for on and off for decades. It did change in the previous administration. It came back in 2019, but there was a brief period where it was sort of up in the air. It can change, but the way and sort of part of the reason why we want to move more quickly if we can is that once we sign a contract, you are locked into whatever that policy is. It's a contractual agreement between parties. So it's very difficult for the government to reach in and change whatever that agreement was. And this was recently tested in the state of Arizona and a few other places where there were attempts to roll back policy with existing contracts. So it is possible that net metering could change. It's actually likely to change in the coming years. The exact timing of that is uncertain. But the sort of hedge against that is putting in storage, which is what a lot of developers are doing now, primarily in the West. So there are lots of other options. But currently right now, things look really good in the near term. There's some more open questions longer term, what that might look like. But there's we think overall there's lots of opportunity for the district, and hopefully it's a relatively low risk for policy change while we're trying to figure out the project still.
For the next 2 years.
Right.
And then, but also it should be noted that the PUC moved to change it, but then the legislature codified it, and it was a vast bipartisan support for codifying the net metering changes. So I think your prediction that changes in net metering law in the state probably would be productive, at least if we're continuing on this path, conceivably. As you mentioned previously, a previous administration was not a productive change to net metering, my personal opinion. But that's it seems highly unlikely for at least the next 2 years. So we should sign a contract in the next 2 years.
Okay, thank you. So maybe when we get further into this, once we commit to somebody, start laying our path, we could make its own, have its own webpage so people could stay informed. I think people, when they hear about this project, their first concern is going to be capital costs. And so it'll be important to lay that out with a chart and show that, you know, we've got nothing out of pocket, really. So that would be nice. And then maybe we could chop out these portions of these meetings, put the videos on there so people can stay informed.
Well, and couldn't this be like a good first charge too for the new committee?
Yes, yes. To Jared's point of return on investment, that's really what the new Environment and Sustainability Committee is all about. Is
return on investment?
True return on investment of carbon, yes. And solar, I'm
on
all
carbon,
in.
you didn't have me, and then you got me back.
What?
So.
No, return carbon. That's
yes,
what, that's,
no,
yes.
I'm there.
Yes, the money actually, I think, is the easy part on a lot of these things, as evidenced by the businesses that grow up around it. But yeah, the carbon and Mother Nature is what we're really trying to help. So, okay, thank you all very much. This wouldn't have gotten to this point without Bill driving it forward and then sitting in on the meetings. I'm humbled by the skill set and the knowledge and everything. So thank you so much for making this happen and being here. And it's all very exciting. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to our next presentation, which is 5B, an annual report from Jeff and Susie.
Yes, it's going to be very exciting. I'm sure everybody wants to stay for this. We love the annual report. Susie Robbins, Director of Academic Services, and myself will walk you through this report, and it will be posted in a few different places, and I'll go to that at the end. The purpose of the annual report, which has been done for many, many, many years in this district and in a lot of districts in Maine, it's a snapshot of the district at this point in time. By the way, it's not required by anybody. It's a local decision to do this, but it's good practice to have information available about our district. The data points that provide more detail about the accomplishments and the challenges facing our district, students and staff, and then trending for comparative purposes when it's applicable. And just a reminder that this report also coincides, I think, in a lot of ways with a lot of the good work that has been done by our teachers and our administrators in the district, our staff, our support staff, in helping our high school and middle school become #1 in Maine, according to the U.S. News and World Report rankings. And I think we should always highlight the good things that we're doing, and inevitably they lead to good things at the end as well. So there's 3 different parts to this report. There's a demographic profile, which I'll be walking you through. Susie will be walking through the part 2, which is key performance and academic indicators. And then we have a photo gallery of the year that we'll just briefly put up there. But what is noteworthy are some notes about this report. Schools and school districts are very complex. There's no one data point, so we can't say it's state assessment data or it's a local assessment data or it's this demographic statistic. It's really the compilation of information and data that we have available that will give us the overall health of the organization. And I say that over the time that I've been working on the annual report, we have adjusted the report many, many times to update it, get rid of things that really weren't beneficial in meeting these objectives, and then putting information and data into the report that was more helpful in showing what really the true picture of our district looks like. So a healthy district obviously relies on multiple indicators. So as much as we're proud of the U.S. News and World Report rankings, that is only one of many, many, many indicators that we want to look at in order to understand our district. So this was the graduating class of 2022, beautiful day. And going from the demographic data from here, we have 2,152 students in the district as of today. 92% are white and 8% of our students are students of color. We have 4 schools in our district, 3 buildings, and 1 campus. And of course, GMS 4, 5, and 6, 8 share the same roof. We have 430 staff members in our district. This is not an FTE count, and I'll go through that in just a moment. Those are whole people, and 99.8% of our staff is white, 0.2% of our staff are staff of color. And those are statistics that have been asked by the Equity Committee and previous boards to include in these numbers. And then, of course, we have one and only Greeley Ranger. There is no other. That's us. 2-year enrollment comparison. I won't go through all of these by school, but just to give you the overall pre-K through 12 enrollment, we have just between last year and this year, we have students, 50 more students in our district. And if you look at that over a 2-year period, we've had an adjustment of 58 more students overall in the district. The high school has been shrinking a little bit over the last couple of years, and our elementary population has been increasing, and that's been a trend for a few years actually. And then we'll see in just a moment, as the enrollment will continue going up, we're going to see increasing enrollment at the secondary level as well over a number of years. You've seen these projections before. These are from this year, actually, sorry, last year, 2022, March of 2022 when it was last published, showing our enrollment will go from 2152 this year up to 2541 by 2031. Excuse me. Right now, actually, well, this is close right now. We're still looking at our numbers for this school year, but these numbers are based on the 2021-22 years. These numbers have varied slightly over the last 4 months. 3.4% of our students are free and reduced. It's hard for us to really say how many students right now are free and reduced because all of the meals are free, and so we do have a lot of families who are opting not to fill the paperwork out, even though the state is still requiring it. So I believe that number is higher than 3.4%, but we've been, usually in the 5, 6, 7% for free and reduced lunch, and if I had to guess, we're probably in that percentage. Special education services last year are 12.5. We're probably up to around 14%. So you'll see parts of this report are based on the previous school year. Parts of this report are based on current, and I'll kind of tell you when we're getting to those places. 4.7% of our students, and these numbers don't change too much from year to year, are Section 504, which is accommodations for academics, not special education. And then we have students with health needs. 5.3% of our students in the district have health conditions which require a health plan. It's a positive number for athletic participation, where last year was 62%. During the kind of the hardest part of the pandemic, we saw a dip in participation in a lot of different things, whether it was clubs or athletics. Our attendance rate did go down last year slightly because of a lot of COVID cases, I think the year before, because it was, students were only in school for part of the week. We had higher attendance. And then obviously last year, when we were all back 5 days, those attendance rates vary because of COVID. Same thing for staff. Truancy went up last year. I think, again, we were back in school 5 days. We had a slight uptick in truancy, and we had a larger increase in suspensions. In our district, we had 18 suspensions last year, which is very high for us, and that actually, in checking in with other districts and looking at national trends, that actually was exactly where most school districts were. There was a lot of increase in disciplinary issues, suspensions last year after the pandemic, having kind of disrupted educational programming for a couple of years prior to that. So again, these are statistics from last school year. And then risk assessments, we had about 100% increase from the previous year. Last year, 49 risk assessments, and those are assessments that are any students that we're concerned about that they might harm themselves or they might harm someone else, we would get permission from parents to conduct a risk assessment as part of that. So we did see a huge increase last year in risk assessments. Special education profile, so we can show this year, so some of the statistics we have from the current year. We have 270 students right now in special education. The state requires each school district to break down the identified categories, so you'll see all of those listed and how many students are identified in each of those areas. You can see specific learning disability is our highest category with 81 students, and that's pretty consistent among the 3 years that we've been able to compare this data. And that is, we're up from last year, 256 students, but we're probably more in line with where we were in the past. So those numbers are, as I mentioned before, around 13.5% to 14% now for students that are identified with a disability by the state's definition. Other enrollment data, we have 25 students, and again, this is current year that we have this information, attending the Portland Arts and Technology High School. That's pretty consistent from year to year. Pathways, that's our internal program at the high school. We have more students accessing that than in previous years, 73 students this year. We have 114 students attending private schools. That's gone back to the levels that it typically is at. Last year there were 146, and we asked people, and we got feedback, anecdotal feedback from people saying, because of the uncertain educational times from the pandemic, there was an increase in private school enrollment. In the year of 2020-21, we had several charter and private schools that year, for whatever reason, didn't report their numbers to us. So charter schools, we have 43 students in charter schools, and I really can't answer that. Most of the students that are enrolled in charter schools are enrolled in Baxter Academy or the Main Connections Academy. Those are the two largest ones. And my guess is that we have more students enrolled if I had to look at the Main Connections Academy. We had 22 students agreements in and 9 students out. Those are agreements between between two superintendents. If a student is residing in one community and they want to go to school in another one, we look at those requests, and then the two superintendents discuss it, and we either decide yes or no on that. And then homeschooling students, we are at 50 right now, slightly down from last year, 58. Again, we had feedback last year. Again, it was still kind of a volatile year in terms of educational pieces and people not sure what they wanted to do. So we had more parents keeping their kids home because of COVID, but that number has gone down this year. And then our staff counts, we have 430 staff members in our district. But when you look at the actual full-time equivalent, we have a lot of part-time staff, so that's why you're seeing a difference between 430 and 395 full-time equivalents is how we detail it. So we have 170, just under 171 teachers, FTE-wise in our district, 179 people in that position. And most of these numbers have stayed the same. The number that you'll see from year to year that will go back and forth are educational technicians. Usually in special education, we've had vacancies from year to year as well. This year, as you know, at the beginning of the year, we had a lot of vacancies. And these are current numbers of our staff this school year. So these account for all of those numbers in here. I think that's it for the numbers. You'll see that food service and custodians We are slightly down in those numbers from what we usually have. Part of it is vacant. We've had vacancies that we have not been able to fill in those. Transportation, we've been in pretty good shape, and so we're really happy about that. Most of our driver positions we've been able to fill for the most part. We had a couple periods where we didn't. So Susie's going to walk through the key performance indicators, otherwise known as academic indicators.
Thank you, Jeff. I will be brief. I know before I get started that I am on a couple different committees that are taking a look at performance indicators, not just through academics, but are there other ways we can measure performance indicators? So I suspect that next year this annual report will look slightly different. And just a reminder, as Jeff noted earlier in this presentation, that the data I'm sharing tonight is just one piece of information that we look at when we take a look at measuring student progress or reviewing our curriculum and instruction and assessment. So the data in this report is from our state assessment that spans across all of our schools. And as many of you know, our state has been working closely with the Northwest Evaluation Association to create a new state assessment. So the assessment has undergone changes for the last 3 years, which means we don't have any comparative data for us internally or really to compare it with others or even the state, except last year in the spring. So the hope is that the state assessment will be finalized this summer so we can again begin to collect data over time. So as you can see from the overall district scores, we continue to score higher than the state average in both reading and mathematics. Our scores, I checked today because someone will probably ask, our scores are also within 2 or 3 percentage points of both Yarmouth and Falmouth. Some are higher, some are lower, but as far as the state average and comparing our scores, we are 1, 2, and 3 when you take a look at Yarmouth, Falmouth, and us. So the next slide, we're going to start with Mabel I. Wilson School. So these slides show performance scores for grade levels, not percentages like the prior slide did. The NWEA is a norm reference test, and they use a unit of measure called a RIT score. I'm not going to explain it. It's named after a person. But basically, when you take a look at the scores, we have scores for third graders where we are above the national norm in reading and then equal to the national norm in mathematics. And the NWA starts at third grade, so Mabel I. Wilson has 1 grade level worth of data. So 4, 5, and actually 4 through 8 and 11th grade have very similar results. If you take a look, we are above average, the national norm average in both reading and math and all our grade levels. So an interesting note or observation that I made today is that for many of the grade levels, the gap between our score and the national norm increases from the previous year. So for instance, the 8th grade math score is 10 points higher than the national average, which is an increase from the 7th grade where the gap is 5 points. And that's a trend that we do want to see happening. We want to see that we are continuing to get further away from the national norm. That shows that our schools are progressing, building upon year after year after year. So that is a good sign. And then in 11th grade, we have very similar results as well. So our indicators that the other indicators that we use at the high school for this slide, National Merit Scholars, last year we had 4, which is about the same as we usually have. And you know, probably know the National Merit Scholarship is a competitive program, so we are very fortunate to have the number that we do have. And then the course failures are down from last year. 42 is still a pretty frightening number. When I talked to the high school administration today, they talked about that number doesn't represent the number who actually failed, that's a number, you can correct me, Graham, but they have to report students who are in danger of failing. So that's the number that's there. And then from there, students are recommended to one of our academic support labs, or in the summer we have credit recovery, those kinds of things.
Is that singular courses, or is it students? Is it by students?
I believe it's courses.
So if a student fails multiple courses, it would be, okay.
Exactly. And then finally, on this slide, it also shows a lot of success for our post-secondary readiness. I won't read you all the scores.
I know these numbers are small, and we will, I will be sending you this report afterwards. Susan and I were still working on it, so we didn't get it to you in advance, but we'll make sure the board has it, and we'll be talking about how it's going to be posted as well.
Sorry, Susie,
Yes.
I can't even come close to reading what's on the screen here.
Sorry.
Could you just explain like what the college post-secondary readiness metrics are?
Sure. So what we have listed here are SAT scores for reading, and then the SAT scores for math. We didn't have the SAT scores 3 years ago during the pandemic. But Tom, what it shows is that, you know, our scores are relatively the same from year to year. And then the next two indicators are the number of students who are enrolled in one AP or IB course, or are they enrolled in 3 or more AP and IB classes. And again, the percentage of students who are enrolled in 3 or more is the same as last year. We have fewer students who are enrolled in just 1. And then they look at AP exams. If they have a 3 or higher, IB exams, you want a 4 or higher, and then our graduation rate. And our graduation rate is, last year was 96.2%, so we continue to have a high percentage of our students graduate. And then the last is the post-secondary enrollment, and we are at 85% of our students who go to a 2 or 4 year college. That is very similar to 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I will just mention that it's all dependent on the class that graduated. So it's not, you know, our general. So each year it's based on that particular class that graduated in June. And I will say that there are more students, I think, recently, who have opted to take a gap year and not go right to college. And if they do that, they are not reported in these numbers. So for students that take a gap year or even a gap semester, they may not be included in that percentage. So that is one of the reasons I think we're at 85%. We tend to be more, we have been, if you look over the last few years, we actually have been closer to 90% for post-secondary. But I think there's a group of, you know, and I would say a growing number of students that choose to take a gap of some kind before they go to college. If that's something that they're choosing to do in the end, which is, you know, it's an interesting trend that we've just noticed recently.
Is there a way to capture that, Jeff?
What's that?
Is there a way to capture that?
The gap
X
year,
number
yeah,
of-
we actually have those direct numbers, and we know how many students actually did what and where they went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do we have college completion rates as follow-up either?
We did do that when we had a community development director who used to do that for
Okay.
us, but we have not been doing that. I believe the guidance office does have some general information that they would have, but it's not going to be like the freshman year, what's the completion rate? I think it's just overall completion rate, but that might be another factor that we could look at.
Do post-secondary enrollment, does that include military? Does that include apprenticeships or other professional?
It doesn't.
tech
It's just
school?
2 and 4, like, you know, and it could be a military school, obviously, like Maine Maritime or whatever would be included. But it does not include apprenticeships or anything. It's really more your traditional 2 and 4.
And
year
is there
schools.
any chance of sort of tracking that? I mean, kids who are choosing to go directly into a profession rather than going to school. I think that's an important statistic to maybe start tracking if possible. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think our guidance office has that information that we could certainly. We haven't put that level of detail in this report, but that's certainly
Just wondering
something
if
that we
that's
could
gonna
look
be a
at.
trend or yeah.
Yeah, and I remember 2 years. I think it was 2 years ago. We had a larger group than usual that went into the military.
Okay.
Right away. I think it was 2 years ago. We actually had a ceremony. We had so many students that went right into the military for that group. And so there's, again, it's very dependent sometimes even on the graduating class too. But that's, we tried out to, you know, put all the information, just kind of give you a high level, but those are some things that if you would like to see those in the report, that actually is a slide coming up. We'll talk about that if there's additional information. Yeah, and in terms of, you know, the numbers of students that were taking at least one AP or IB course, you'll see that's a pretty significant decrease. You know, I think we're usually at 70% or somewhere around 70%, and that goes back a few years before this. If I had to guess, I really think that coming off of a couple of difficult educational years with the pandemic, students may not have felt as comfortable enrolling in an AP or IB course right away, and that may have reflected those numbers. But that is a guess, and I think Avery is willing to maybe give his guess. I'm thinking right now.
No, I was just going to ask if 3 is the grade you need to pass. I should know this because I'm in
It
one,
is.
but
Yeah, it
all
is.
right.
Yeah.
And so it's not like more students are choosing to do 3 or more because that number would have gone up, right? So
Right.
It really is less students are choosing to take an advanced course.
Yeah, and again, that I think, you know, looking at this information, and this is not the current year, so it'll be really interesting to see what this year looks like when we have all the numbers at the end of the year. I do think that, you know, all the data that we've been looking at for the last couple of years is really all over the place. We used to be very consistent with numbers, and we could say, oh, that's pretty predictable. And we're seeing a lot more variability in these numbers over the last couple of years. And again, I'm not trying to blame the pandemic, but I'm going to blame it as much as I can. As we move away from that, I think we'll hopefully see more consistency and more, you know, comparison. But there's a lot of volatility in some of these numbers.
It's probably
wait a-
also because of the pandemic, that overall perspective of the less pressure,
Yep.
you know, like just a different shift in, it's like the great resignation, everyone's leaving their jobs, and
Right.
so it's probably that trickle-down effect. It's not us.
And it's just, I mean, I think even the confidence of taking a course of, you know, after having a lot of disruptions in education for 2 years, is that something I really want to take on?
Right.
You know, I think students probably, my guess is that they were thinking twice about it.
Yep.
And want to make sure that they're all set, just on the basics. So
So
it's probably a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So I know there was a lot of amendments to the IB curriculum during the pandemic. I don't know, maybe you could speak more about the AP curriculum and if the same sort of thing was going on.
Jeff,
I
do you
don't
know
know.
that one for sure? I know
It
about
was-
IB.
It wasn't the curriculum that was changing. It was more the tests that kept changing with a lot of the AP exams underwent changes during the pandemic, and I know that a lot of them are either going back or they're not going back to more traditional approach. But I don't think it was the curriculum. If anything, it was compacted a little bit, but it's always compacted, especially up here in Maine. We're 3 weeks behind everybody. The rest of the whole country, we're 3 weeks behind. So that's why if you're enrolled in an AP course or even an IB course, the teachers are saying, we've got to accelerate here. You might get a lot of homework because, you know, the southern states are 3 weeks ahead. The exams are the exact same date. Doesn't matter where you are in the country. So we're always at a disadvantage. So that's why when people say, can't we start after Labor Day? We always kind of come back and say, we're going to probably lose 3 school days or 2 school days. And that's always been a really important argument in this community not to do that because of that. Yeah.
Do you know what the national average is for passing the AP or IB courses?
I don't have that information. That's actually a really good question.
I'm writing all these down, Jeff.
Yeah, these are great.
I have a question about SAT and ACT test taking. Nationally, over the pandemic, that those percentages really plummeted. Do you know how things currently stand? I remember this being a topic last year, and I'm curious if we bounced back at all.
You mean in terms generally, nationally, or?
Here at Greeley High School.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw a slight bounce back from the year before for the SAT, for writing, looking at the math. That certainly bounced back. Reading, writing.
Just in terms of like how many people are taking the test?
Oh, that's a good question too, because it used to be 100%, and obviously it's not 100% anymore. And we have a lot of test optional colleges, and that's during the pandemic that increase, as everyone knows, and there's a lot of colleges and universities that just are not going back to it.
Right.
So that actually would be a great statistic to find out as well, how many of our students are participating in it. My guess is it's pretty high here, but it would be good to know, since the state is not requiring the SAT anymore. Good questions.
So Jeff, I think the next section is photos.
We have photos, and we just, this is obviously for, we'll be putting this online and people can look at this. This was also in some of these photos, excuse me, were in the annual report to the communities. There's a link that will take you to the annual report in the communities. Those go into the each town's annual report that they do as well. But here's just some images from the previous year. A lot of them are from this past fall. Mr. Shove, I think one of these is your students.
Yeah, in the middle on the left there, those are IB geographers on their IA field work. So we go into the old port in Portland this year and study gentrification and how it's affecting the fishing industry in Portland. So that was great.
Yeah, I remember that. That's great. A lot of these, again, are from the fall. It was nice to have the playback completely in person with huge audiences. We hadn't had that for a while. Grandparents' Day was back as well. A lot of cards made for Veterans Day in November.
Lou the dog.
And then, of course, Lou the dog came to visit. That was for board, and I believe Mr. Francis, these are National Merit Scholars that were named this fall. And this is the senior class on the bottom right, doing the sunrise, senior sunrise, which is an annual tradition. I'm sure Tommy is, Avery, sorry, not Tommy. Avery, I'm sure you're somewhere in there, or maybe you're grabbing breakfast at the time. It's pretty early in the morning, but so some possible amendments to the report. Susie was taking notes, but some other things that have come up that we've been asked about: athletic and other clubs, the kind of participation. Do we have additional data, such as do we have more students, in particular groups that participate in athletics and clubs other than other students, and is that a point of interest for data comparison? Obviously, Susie mentioned the comparison of assessment scores to the state and region. We should have a lot more information in 2023 as the state assessment settles in. The MyHES survey results, those surveys will be given this winter, coming right up, in middle school and high school, and that's a really important survey data point. That is the main integrative youth health survey, which asks a lot of questions of students about their general wellness, health. It also asks questions about substance use and things like that. And it's we've always had important information to look at the end of that result. So we'll have those results for you. And then we are resuming the annual stakeholder survey results, which we have not done for 3 years. And that's for students, staff, and parents. And I want to thank Susie, Leanne, and Tom for helping. I think those, did I get everybody? They were helping with that. And those surveys will be going out this winter and early spring for all 3 stakeholder groups. Really excited to see those beginning again. We've done a lot of trending and comparison of data points from those survey results, so it'll be nice to have those back again. And actually, we'll be providing a report prior to the annual report next year, once we have those results. And this report, obviously tonight, you'll get it. I'll send you an email as well to the board. It will be in this week's district weekly newsletter. And it will be posted on our website under the district drop down on the left of the website. And we'll be sending this to the crier in the notes with a link and asking both towns if they would please put it in their information that goes out to residents. So that's how we'll be communicating this report. So I know a lot of it's dry information, and some of it we don't have good comparative data. But as we get further into a more typical kind of situation, I think we'll be back with those comparative numbers a year from now. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Jeff, I was just wondering, because I know in policy ACA it has the annual report out, and I thought that we had talked that it would maybe be added into this. I mean, I know there isn't much to report now, but I'm just wanted to see if that was, if I was remembering correctly.
For ACA and having more specific information about equity, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about it, but the equity committee I thought was going to, wasn't that a discussion that I haven't been at a couple meetings. There's going to be a discussion about what kind of data points might go in there, because I don't know if ACA outlines that specifically, but yes.
I think, you're referring to, the ACA specifies that the superintendent will come up with a plan pursuant to the ACA.
And that there was going to be an annual report on the plan, yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and until the plan, obviously, until we've got the plan, we can't report on it. But
right.
it would be one that we would be reporting on.
Okay.
Whether it's in this whether it's in this report or it would be a separate report,
okay.
I'm not sure.
What
we're trying to do is put a lot of stuff in one report, so we're not, we don't have reports everywhere. And we could say this is the annual report on everything we're supposed to report on, but you're right, and that is part of it.
Okay, thank you.
I just have questions I was jotting down along the way. So you mentioned that there has been some follow through, like when a student elects to go to a private school for high school or a charter school. So there is some communication where we're asking these kids why they left?
In 8th grade we do. That's where usually students will make their decisions most of the time, or the family will make the decision in 8th grade. So at the end of 8th grade each year, and we did this last year as well, we ask families to please give us information, why if your child is going to be going to private school or charter school, why, or if they're going to Greeley High School. And part of it is just for planning. We want to know how many students are coming, and we usually have anywhere from 5 to 10% of our students say they're going to a private or charter school each year. And then we'll ask why. And we get a pretty good response rate. Okay. We have anecdotal comments that people will make. Okay. We also have just some quick, tell us why, are these some of the reasons? So it gives us information. Most of it, honestly, and we're free to share those results. Those are, we have generic public survey results that we have. Yeah. And I think I shared it with the previous board when we got those results, so I shared it in an update. But basically, most of the time, it's our family is always, our children go to Cheverus, or we went to Cheverus, or we went to, wherever, Baxter School for, Baxter Academy, our older child went there, or whatever. That's usually the comments that we get. Once in a while, we'll hear Greeley's too big, or, whatever, but.
So let's say someone wanted to leave the school because of bullying or, you know, a very negative adverse experience. How is that communicated? How is that dealt with?
So people do that have given us that feedback on a survey. We don't usually get that very much on a survey, but occasionally somebody will say that.
Okay.
Usually it's handled through guidance counselors, social workers, administrators working on that.
So there is follow-up if someone had an adverse experience?
Yes, and usually we know about that, and it's not through a survey, because the survey is anonymous. So we're not asking people to put their names in or anything like that.
Okay.
We're just trying to get a general feel, what is the trend and what can we plan for?
Okay.
We're not asking people to put their names in.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I tag on
there's
to
a
that?
way for us to see that? Sorry.
Can I tag on to your question, Kim?
Yeah.
Is that question only asked as they're entering high school? Not.
Yes, that's the time that that's generally when we have students that decide to leave. Now, occasionally, of course, we have students that leave.
Or
the
never
school system,
came,
or
like-
never came, or come in, in high school. We actually have probably more superintendent's agreements to come in at the high school and at Wilson right at the beginning. Those are usually our two biggest areas where students come in. And then for leaving, it's usually high school.
Maybe that slide that had the ins and outs, maybe just do it by grade or high school and lower or something.
Yeah, and we used to do that actually. I used
Yeah.
to break it out by elementary, secondary, and then we stopped doing it.
Okay.
But yeah, that could be another one on the list.
Yeah, I know.
We adjust this all the time. We're always looking for different ways to do this report. So this report's evolved many times over the years.
And then I had a question, the enrollment projection page, when I was looking at the 2021 report that you sent us, and the enrollment projection for 2022, 2023 was 2152, and that is the number, right, actually the accurate
Yes.
number?
Yeah.
So is it a coincidence that they're the same, or was that it was projected and it actually came to fruition?
No, she's really good.
She's really good. Okay.
She's really good.
Because I
Yeah.
don't recall hearing that number was that accurate, and that would be helpful.
No, she really got it. She
Yeah.
nailed it. I mean,
that's
and
amazing.
not to take any credit away from Rebecca, but Wandell, who did the report, but I mean, she just did it in March, so she kind of.
Okay.
had-
Yeah.
But it really did come out right on the number.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I
it was
think
kind of.
that's-
I was looking at those numbers and like, this is not going to be exact. There's no way, and of course it was.
Yeah, I
it
think
won't
that
be
would
exact
be-
every year, but as long as it's in the ballpark, that's all we care about.
Well, and I think definitely, if we can communicate that to the public, especially in light of needing a new school, because there were so many questions about, how accurate are these
Right.
enrollment projections, and of course, going back to 2009, why should we trust these instead of the ones in 2009? But if we were to show how on the money she
And
is,
she's
that's
the
really
same person who's
powerful.
done all three reports since 2016, 16, 19, 22. She's been the common denominator for these reports. She's written them, and she's been incredibly accurate, all three reports, as we followed those numbers each
Yeah.
time.
I would
So-
love to really emphasize that as we talk
I would
about the
recommend
need
that
for
the
new
board,
school.
every 2 years at least every 2 years do another report with her.
Yeah.
And she did tell me that. She said, when you have a district increasing as quickly as this one is, you want to stay on top of it and continue to make sure your numbers are super accurate.
Right.
It could go up or down a lot when you have development and things like that going on.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I had a question about course failures. That's for the high school.
Yes.
Is there measurement of elementary school, middle school kids who, I don't know that they officially fail a class, but need to repeat a grade or, any sort of financial or academic struggling?
Yeah, our policy doesn't, for the most part, doesn't allow students to repeat for academic reasons. We have other supports in place for students. We have a lot of supports.
Okay, so failure really.
It really
is what's
isn't an
made to use that
option,
word, yeah.
and students don't repeat a grade because they failed a grade,
Got it.
And even in high school, it's all based on credit, and we have credit recovery programs.
Right.
So the vast majority of students who are in danger of failing a course or actually have failed a course recover that credit just by taking part of the course.
Right.
Just the part that they really weren't getting. Just make sure they get up to snuff and then they pass the course. So we don't actually have 46 failed courses at the high school.
Okay.
And I think Susie also pointed out that those were in danger of failing, those numbers.
Okay.
And then on top of that, we have credit recovery, where most students opt to take credit recovery.
And is it worth measuring what's going on in middle school and elementary school academic
That would be through
struggling?
RTI, response to
Yeah.
intervention. That's really where we put a lot of support for students who are academically not where they should be, or we would expect them to be. So that would be, I mean, it would be really more an RTI report.
Okay.
In the past, all the principals have done an RTI report to the board. I think a year ago, we actually did the last one.
Okay.
Susie was involved in that presentation, so if the board would like to hear more about RTI, I think our district probably, I'm not trying to toot our horn, but we do probably some of the best work around RTI our teachers do that I've ever been involved in this district. So it'll be worth probably hearing more about that at some point. Yeah.
Kim, do you mind if I piggyback on that question?
Please. Yeah.
So I'm curious how you define failure. So is it just like getting an F like that, or is it like a warning of like getting an F? I guess where I'm going with this is it purely an indicator of academic performance, or could failure result from attrition or students just not showing up? Whether there's a correlation there between absences during COVID and failing.
That's definitely part of it. So it can be for performance. Doesn't mean the ability of the student isn't there. It might mean they just didn't come to class, or for whatever reason weren't in class. If there's some sort of medical reason, we always work with the student around that. That is not part of this, to make sure that they're getting the support. But I think our high school has historically done a really good job with credit recovery to make sure that students that have failed a course, they don't need to move forward if they don't want to, and they get a lot of guidance around that you can recover this part of the course and then pass the course. That's our goal. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was another note that's related to this, and it says that we have 96% graduation rate. We hover between 94 and 96 on any given year. I would say that our graduation rate is probably like 99.5, if not higher, and that's because the state allows us to report through August after a student graduates. We have a lot of students that didn't quite make it to graduation, their credits, but over the summer they'll get that extra half credit, quarter credit that they needed, and they'll actually graduate. The state allows us to do that, but what we can't report, and what you don't see in those numbers, are students who opt to come back for a semester, finish, or they might go to adult education, finish. In Freeport, often that's where students go from here. And we're not allowed to report that number. So I would say our graduation rate is actually higher, but this is the state reporting number that we have to use.
Okay.
That it's kind of related to. But I would say that, our high school does a really good job of getting kids to graduation, getting kids not, if they're failing a course, let's get them passing that course. They don't have to take it over again. That's really an old model that, occasionally a student does have to take a class over because they're not engaging in that course, that credit recovery, but that is an exception to the rule.
Thanks.
Yeah. I don't know, Susie, if you wanted to add anything to.
Sorry, I just had one other question that I forgot to ask. I was wondering if we have any data on the number of students who are experiencing homelessness in the district.
We do. We have anywhere from 3 to 5 students right now. We used to have, I would say 10 years ago, we had probably maybe 15 students. But those numbers have dropped a lot over the years. I don't know why. But we also have a child find responsibility, and anytime we know anything about a homeless student, we're on top of that. We have a homeless liaison, Peter Scott, and he works with students who are homeless and their families, in making sure that we're on top of that. Right now we have 4 students in the district who are homeless. And that was something that we were gonna, I think we've put it in the annual report before, we've removed it, so that's certainly something we can add back in. That's another one for the list.
Avery, go for
Yeah, so for free/reduced meals, as I understand it, that's kind of the status quo throughout the state is, all students have free meals. So how is that number calculated?
So it truly is, when a parent fills out a form for a free and reduced lunch, we still ask parents if they meet that income guideline to please fill the form out so that we know what our statistics are. The state has that information.
So at a minimum, it's that
yeah.
number.
Yeah, I guess it's probably closer to 6, maybe 7% in our district. I think that's probably half of what we have. That's more typical for us, 6 to 7% in our district. And I also will say, I'm going out on a huge limb by saying this, but I will say it. I think in this particular community, there is some sort of stigma attached to even filling out the form, even if you're eligible. And I wonder sometimes if our number is even lower than it really should be. In other communities, it's not considered a stigma, and parents will fill it out. But I've heard that, and I've heard that from counselors, from social workers, from our administrators. And I do worry about that. Right now, I'm not worried because everything's free. But when the state pulls the plug or the federal government pulls the plug on that, I do worry that, we need to get back to that.
Well,
But,
the
yes.
other challenge is that a lot of funding is dependent on the percentage of kids that are eligible.
Exactly.
That's
And-
what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
What
It is in our EPS
formula funding is dependent upon that number?
No, they've suspended. The state has
The
taken all
state.
that into consideration, and they're not focused on that like they have been. But it does play into the EPS formula.
It's a problem.
It is.
Because I'm not worried about the state pulling the plug on the free lunch program because it's in statute now across the board. It would take a significant act of the legislature to roll that back. But the fact that it impacts formula funding when there's no incentive, I mean, why would you fill that out? I mean,
There isn't any incentive.
so that's bad.
It's
Yeah.
flawed data at this point.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think there's other ways to determine disadvantaged students and find that information out, obviously. But the major way the state of Maine does find that out is for parents filling out the free and reduced. So I think that, there's going to have to be some sort of policy change with this and how the EPS formula is calculated. Because for some districts, I'm not as concerned about our district, but with some districts like Lewiston, Portland, they need to have more accurate numbers in order to get the right funding for their students. We have
Everybody needs
smaller numbers here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's more than likely significantly less of a problem for us than it is for other districts. But just equity-based for everyone, it would make a lot of sense to get better data.
Yeah.
There's two ways, really. One is to just incentivize through communication campaigns that everyone just fills it out. Like, it's the norm that every family in the district fills it out. And then, it's just to communicate how important it is. But from a policy perspective, there's a number of states now that have moved to the free model. Then I think that puts additional pressures on some of those funding formulas to move away from that as the indicator.
I agree. I think, the state has, for a couple of years, suspended a lot of the EPS formula, or they've just used the data and just moved it forward to the next year. But that's going to stop. I mean, they're obviously very dependent on that disadvantaged number.
Aren't there other things too that a student can qualify for, like an exam fee or a field trip fee? Are there other things that are determined by whether they would have qualified?
Yeah, we don't report that, though, to the state, so they wouldn't have that information for our EPS formula for the funding that we get.
Right, but isn't that helpful as a district?
It is, and that's the stuff that actually helps our social workers and guidance counselors and administrators make sure that we're trying to get as many, families to please fill out those forms. We do, I will say, we work on it with families, but at the end of the day, it's not our form to fill out. But
Right.
yeah. Tommy?
Do you have a number of students that are getting lunch consistently each day, or like percentage of the school population? Or
We do, yeah. I mean, I can definitely get that information. It's definitely gone up since the pandemic started, and especially with free lunch and breakfast. In Wilson School, for example, I want to say, Susie, maybe you know this number more, but I know we're serving well over 400, 500 lunches in a day, whereas we were probably serving half of that before the pandemic. More kids were bringing their lunches from home. So since that, I mean, it's been a great change, I think, personally, for kids to get a, you know, a hotter lunch or a warmer lunch on most days and be able to access the food.
Well, and then it also reduces the stigma, though, because people, you know, students who do qualify for free and reduced aren't singled out because they're
Right.
the ones who are going through the line.
Exactly. And this, we have so many more kids accessing our food program. That's a good point, that we don't have students have to worry about that as being a worry point for them. But Avery?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot during this meeting about, you know, being environment minded. Do we have numbers on student bus utilization? Like the amount of students who are actually riding the
We have
buses?
all this information. We can get it pretty quickly. We know how many students ride a bus. We know how many students ride a bus consistently in our district. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one.
Same
Tackling
question about
those
food
sorts
waste.
of questions, I think, would be part of the new committee.
Yeah.
We should probably
Put their measures for
similar question about
Yeah.
food waste. Do we have any analysis of, given the amount of more lunches we're making, have we seen an uptick in food waste? I'd probably take
No,
a
but
separate.
we have anecdotal information that students are actually noticing that, you know, why aren't we recycling like we were before in the bins? We had obviously suspended that during that peak, you know, the P period. I'm not gonna keep saying pandemic.
The state
but-
of Maine doesn't really recycle anymore.
Right, and that's another part of it. So we used to have the big recycling bins, and then now we've gotten away from it. We're not recycling. So we've had students come to us and say, you know, there's a lot of food waste. We've had staff notice it. It is a problem we've been talking about. You know, this is, what are we gonna do at this point? We've got this big problem.
Yeah.
So we have kids that, you know, because their parents are opting to have them eat the lunch, they're not eating the lunch. You know, we have more kids opting to eat. And I couldn't give you a number, but I just roaming through the cafeteria sometimes I'll notice kids not eating, and I'll once in a while ask them, why aren't you eating? I don't like it. So,
That's probably
but
my
the
son,
food is really
by the
good.
way.
It's really good though. It's really good. Everybody should be eating it.
So one question I had, we saw that the suspensions were really up last year. Have you noticed a similar trend this year? Or?
Not nearly, not at the rate, no, so far. And I would also say the risk assessments are also not at the rate, still pretty steady.
Okay.
But I don't think, don't quote me, but I don't think we're going to see those numbers this year. I feel like things have leveled or steadied from last year.
And is there a pattern in the year? Typically, like, do you see more in the fall or in the spring, or is it pretty consistent?
There's no real rhyme or reason, I couldn't tell you. I think just having been a principal, it's usually right before vacation, towards the end of the school year. It's not the beginning of the year.
Okay.
The only thing at the beginning of the year is if we have a student that's just, you know, a couple students testing the waters or whatever, and you know, might be new to the school and trying to figure that out. But generally speaking, it's just your usual before a vacation, May and June. So, teachers, wonderful. Graham loves those months probably.
So is the number of suspensions different than the number of students who've been suspended?
Is it
Like,
Oh.
do we have repeat offenders?
Yeah, so if a student was suspended 5 times, for example, the
Yeah,
same student, that's included in that number.
Oh.
All right.
So these are not individual students, these are suspensions. So there might be you know, it's not 46 students necessarily that were suspended, in fact, or whatever that number was from the slide. It's probably far fewer, but it might
Okay.
be a student that's been suspended more than
Do you have that
once.
number?
We do, but I think for privacy reasons, we don't
Oh, you
want to put
can't
that in the
share it,
report.
yeah.
There are certain things that we can't put in this report just because it might, and some of the assessment data will say the same thing to you. We can't categorize like how many students did this well, you know, from different populations of students, because some of our cohort sizes are way too small, and that would be one of them. So we would probably be at least directly or indirectly identifying. Yeah, good question though. These are good statistical questions. We should do a course on this.
Are most suspensions happening at the high school or the higher levels?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. It's definitely middle school, high school for the most part, and then I would say most of them are at the high school level. Yes. Yeah, and I'm even thinking about this year, and it's high school. Yeah, that's typical though.
Kim.
So kind of combination, I just wanted to go back to the students who are taking advantage of AP and IB classes. And tangent to that is that number of kids who go on to a trade school or an apprenticeship of some sort. Because one of the things I hear a lot is that Greeley could do better with kids who maybe aren't college bound. So a question, actually, maybe Graham, even you could answer this. Like, at what point is IB enrollment too low for a class? Like, at what point would we say this is just not worth doing? And I'm a huge proponent of IB, so please don't take it that way. But how do you
I'd love
measure?
to hear a teacher's perspective. Just from my perspective, and Susie might have a different perspective as the IB kind of overseeing as part of her responsibilities. But we have courses that are low in IB. We have AP courses that have low enrollment as well. We also have courses that are designed for students that need a lot of extra support, that have smaller classes. So I think with the IB and AP courses, that's the balance when you have a high school of just over 600 students and you're offering a whole array of things. You want to, is it okay to offer a course that has smaller numbers in order to offer a rigorous course that students might not be able to access? Is it a cost? Absolutely. But is it worth the cost? And I think those are questions that have come up in the past that previous boards have asked. We've even provided information on all of our enrollments in all of our courses. And there's always a trend that you'll see some courses are a little bit oversubscribed and some are undersubscribed. I think we've done a really good job in the last 5 years trying to even that out a little bit more. We don't do a great job sometimes. Sometimes it's just based on student interest.
Sure.
And we want to offer a course that we know students are very interested in. Even if there's 5 or 6 students that are enrolled in the course, we want to offer it because they're not going to get that course anywhere else.
Right.
And so that's a back and forth that we do. Okay. We've eliminated courses that we truly weren't seeing consistently enough students enrolled. We make sure we don't duplicate courses. I think right now we have 2 duplications, or kind of not duplications, but similar courses, AP and IB, that we're still looking at. But other than that, we've made a lot of efforts not to do that.
And my understanding is that if a school offers IB, for example, that a college will look at that a student who's applying to that college and they'll say, okay, your school offered AP and they offered IB, yes, and you didn't take advantage of it, then they actually have their chance of getting admitted is lower because they didn't take advantage of the higher level class. Am I saying that?
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to IB or AP, but I think whatever your courses are that you offer in your school, mm-hmm, it's called the school profile, and right, colleges know what Greeley's school profile is. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the school profile, we profile really well. We're a high profiling high school. And so colleges will see, did you take at least an AP course, or you take several, mm-hmm, higher level courses or complex courses in your high school, whether it was IB or AP, it doesn't matter. But they're looking for that interest. Did the student show interest in doing that and, make that effort? Yes, that is absolutely true.
So then if less kids are taking advantage of it, are they having a harder time getting into college? Does that adversely affect a population?
It could. I mean, it could if students, if you've got another high school in Maine, and there's many that don't offer any AP or IB courses, mm-hmm, at all. Of course, we're only one of 3 high schools that offer IB.
Right.
But there's some high schools that just don't have the resources to offer AP. Mm-hmm. Then colleges will look at that school and look at their highest, attaining courses that they offer. Did the student access those courses or not? Mm-hmm. And that's what they go on. Okay. So, but it doesn't mean that a student needs to be taking all IB or AP courses. Oh, sure. Just means that there's a mix. They're showing some effort to take some. They don't have to take them all. So I don't want all our high school students to think they need to start taking. That's too much for many kids.
My daughter was full IB, so
it depends on the student.
It was great, but
yeah, each student is individual.
Exactly.
That's how I look at it.
No, because it is kind of expensive. And so if that number is going down of kids who are even just taking advantage of one class, maybe there should be more encouragement, or make it easier for kids to enroll in these classes, because especially if they're not taking advantage of it. do they know that's important for
We're
college?
actually talking about that, and Avery might have an answer. He looks like he does.
Yeah, taking these courses is very important when you go to Greeley High School.
Yeah, okay.
You know, at some places, you know, taking one AP course, you know, even one is a lot. But, you know, if you take like 3 AP courses here plus an IB course, that's kind of the status quo.
Well, I know it's really hard to do a la carte too versus all
It
or
is.
nothing.
It is hard, and it's a balancing act for a lot of students, and students go back and forth on that too, depending on the year, I think, and, you know, where they're at with their own, you know, where they want to be, you know, what their interest is. But I think if we had seen a general trend of that, you know, we usually are at 70%. Has been our, you know, I think back a few more years beyond those 3. That's usually what I remember seeing is 70%, taking at least one AP or IB course.
So I guess then maybe my final question, I'm sorry, everybody, I know I'm taking a lot here, but perhaps in a future annual report, we could also include how many kids are choosing to take whatever practical skills classes we have. And I admit I'm not aware of us versus paths and pathways, but, you know, how does that balance? How are kids are an equal number of kids taking advantage of these sort of you know, practical skills where they can go right into a career more or less, or
I think we've made inroads
taking
in
it
that
upper
with
level?
Pathways. Pathways is about apprenticeships. It's about project-based experiences. We have brought back things like, or we've made sure we've kept things like light woodworking.
Okay.
In our STEM program. We've offered more cyber courses. I think we've offered or added 2 for students that are interested in that in high school in the last few years. And we've been talking about electives for students that need more electives. We tried running 2 courses this year that didn't fly because of student interest.
Okay.
One around filmmaking, for example, and things like that. But with drama, we now have a theater program, theater teacher back. We had one, she retired, and then we didn't have one for a few years. Now we have one back, thankfully to the board for supporting that. Those are the kinds of things that we keep talking about. What's a well-rounded course, you know, offering look like?
Thank you. I know I was asking a lot.
I want to thank you though, Kim, because I mean, I think from me, what I'm hearing from these questions is, you know, our school, particularly Greeley, is a high-performing school. And we want to make sure that we're not losing the students who aren't perhaps interested or wanting to be engaged at that academic level. And so how can we capture the way that we're making sure that, we're looking out for all of our students at each of their ability levels?
So I'd be curious to know how IB and AP enrollment breaks down by gender. Because I know personally, I'm one of 2 boys in an IB class of 15. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, but it may be worth looking into.
Tommy.
Interesting.
The full IB cohort is 50-50 male-female, but yeah. So I don't know comparative in other IB classes, but it might just be like luck of the draw.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard that. That's the first time I've heard that. I think it's probably year to year dependent as well on the group of students that are in that course. But these are all good questions. I mean, I think we're always looking at information and data and trying to figure out what are we doing. And that's why we do this report, so that it generates more interest and more questions. So keeps us on top of things.
Okay. Jeff, I had a couple of things. The cost of the super agreements, because we are net gaining students. So how does that work as far as finances go?
So we receive state subsidy for every student enrolled in our school, just like every district in Maine. So if we take in more students, we will get the subsidy. I don't do it for that purpose. It's for students that are truly interested in being here. And if we can accommodate, we always look at class size. We look at, always check with the principal to make sure that we have room. At the secondary level, it's a little bit easier for us to do that, but I've said no to families when, especially at the elementary level, when we just don't have the room. We have too many kids in a class already, and we can't accommodate. But we get the state subsidy for that student. When they come here, if we lose a student to another district, they get the subsidy.
Which is what percentage?
It's I think it's around 12,000 right now, state subsidy for a student, and that's just the basic state subsidy, nothing else.
So there's no other exchange of funds between the towns to cover the remainder?
Nope. It's actually it's unlawful for us to do that. We can't do it.
Interesting.
Yep.
And we spent a lot of time early in the school year talking about ed techs and trying to attract hiring new ed techs, but on the custodians, I know we're down quite a few. What are we doing to solve that? Because I've heard complaints recently of, just sort of general cleanliness, and I'm sure those two go hand in hand with a shortage.
Yeah, it's a shortage, and we've had that's probably right now the toughest group. It was ed techs, and I think we've really we've actually filled just about all vacancies there. But with custodians, I think that's our group right now that we're struggling the most to find custodians. So I do not have a good answer, except that we've also had some also tragic situations with a couple of families where we actually lost a custodian. There's some things going on in that department as well, with just family stuff, personal stuff. Yes, I agree that is an area that we've got to beef up.
Okay, other comments, questions, concerns? Can move on. Okay, to committees. Finance, Vanessa, please.
Oh, okay. Not
Oh,
superintendent.
wait a
sorry.
minute. Are we doing a report?
Yeah, I do have a report. I know it's late.
It's like,
But it's been a
jeez.
while since I've done a report.
All right.
Thank you,
so I
Susie.
figured-
Back up.
Thank you, Susie.
Jeff, while you're bringing that up, it's good to have you back.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Even though our chair was going to skim right over it.
See, I know.
Getting late.
Past
Well,
Jason's bedtime.
Happy New Year. It's been a couple of meetings. So just want to, some of these you might have seen, but these are a lot of things just going on very, very quickly. A lot of festivities right before the break. Snowmen really do come to life at 4 or 5. There's a lot of fun activities. One of them was Twins Day at the high school. We had a lot of students participating in a variety of activities, or don't bring your backpack to school was one day and do something else. That's always fun. And we had our staff getting into it as well. As you can see, our administrators got into it up there in the right top. So I'd like to highlight Quinn Richter, and he's a student at Paths, and he's been in the cybersecurity. They have a great program down at Paths, and he was involved in a 3-day competition for cybersecurity from the National Cyber League, and this was a national competition for high school and college students, and he placed 45th in the country for high school contestants in the top 5%. And then if you combine college students in with that, in the top 10%, with over 6,000 competitors. So really terrific to highlight. And again, Paths has they have a lot of wonderful programs down there, but cybersecurity is one of their newer programs, and they've really, it's amazing, and we've had a lot of students interested in that. Slugger the Sea Dog visited the middle school right before the break, so if you saw a slugger hanging around, this is also we're right into the kind of the heart of the winter athletics, what we call Winter Athletics 1, and then we have a second, part 2 later, because winter's so long here in Maine. But a lot of our teams were playing right through the break, and here are just some snapshots. We have obviously a lot more. And this is a great news for our district. The Department of Ed has offered free mobile computer science labs to all public schools in the state, and each school had an option of purchasing different kinds of labs. We took full advantage of this. Our staff was very enthusiastic, our administrators, in the science area across our district. Each set of equipment was $5,000 in value, so these are fairly expensive if we were trying to do this on our own. Our district was able to secure 13 of these. We were able to reserve them and get them. They're now on site, and that's a value of $65,000 for our schools. So really great, and thank you to the Department of Ed.
Spread throughout the district, Jeff?
Yes, we did spread them out throughout the district. Yep, all four schools. Mabel Wilson School students, I was able to visit their assembly right before the break. They have monthly assemblies now. This is part of their kind of connections, and they split the school in two because there's so many students. But this was half of the school. The staff were up front and kind of with noisemakers and enjoying having some fun with the kids in the gym. Our GMS life skills students, this is a great new program that they just started this year, and it should say, yeah, it's GMS, are taking and making and filling popcorn orders, and it's called the Weebie Poppin', is a new popcorn business that they started, and our FLS students have been popping the popcorn and then delivering it, and they've been doing a lot of things academically around counting, cooking, problem solving, socializing, etc. So it's been a nice program for them. First graders in Mrs. Story and Mrs. Evans classes at Mabel delivered mail to the Cumberland Post Office, and I don't know if any of you have children in those classes, but you might have gotten a letter in the mail. We have a lot of letter writing curriculum pieces throughout our curriculum, and this is one way that kids physically learn how to go to the post office and deliver those. High school senior French students, this was a little bit dated, but again, I didn't have a chance to report on it earlier. This is a nice trip for them. The senior French students at the high school went for an adventure-filled immersion experience over a weekend in Quebec City with the French department, French faculty. And this is something that is annual, but always exciting, and we had a lot of students involved in this. The weather was great, too. It hasn't really gotten in the way, and I believe this project is now over, but during the month of December, you could go around, 8th graders, they're studying the universe, and physically seeing how things, if you're looking at it from if trying to look at it from a scale model, where is the sun in relation to the earth, and then making sure that, calculating the distance that 1 foot would be in relation to those if you're putting it on a scale. So in this respect, every foot they used on campus really represented over 3 million miles, which kind of boggles my mind. But it's really neat to see the relation of these physical pieces of the universe and how they were laid out on campus. It's a big project for 8th graders and a really high problem solving. Students in Seth Knowles' IB Latin course, it's just an example of an IB project. Some students from that course were in the library, and they're looking at primary sources. These are the kind of things they do in IB courses. Interpreting, analyzing, and developing logical arguments in response to research questions around a classical language. And the faculty's band, Mr. Shove, are you on the faculty's band? I can't. Mr. Curry, that's right. We have a number of faculty members that are involved in the faculty's band, and they performed right before the break in the Commons for high school students and staff. So, and I don't know if you know Mr. Pride, Doug Pride, he just retired last year, math teacher. He came back as a member of the faculties. And that is the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Jeff. Questions, comments? It's like the feel-good news.
Yes. Yep. We'll keep it that way.
Okay, now moving on to committees. Finance, Vanessa, please.
Okay, I have a couple updates. Right now, our accounting firm, we're under an audit request, and that's going to be completed by the 12th. Our next finance committee, we're going to be discussing strategic priorities, and that's January 23rd. I think we're still on.
Yeah, I think we're trying to possibly move that date if we can
Earlier.
a little bit. Yeah, we're going to try to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is coming directly from Jeff's email. It's about the North Yarmouth and Cumberland haven't been happy with when the budget is done. And Jeff just realized or updated us that the MSMA has engaged with the Maine Municipal to help with the budget timeline. If this bill passes, then MSAD 51 can move our budget meetings earlier and provide the towns with more times for absentee ballots. It looks promising now that the MMA and the MSMA are working together on this bill and have a sponsor. So the Finance Committee is going to move forward, update the timeline as if it's going to be passed. If it doesn't pass, we do fall back to our old timeline.
Right. Yeah, so and this is all, it really isn't the SAD. You know, we've been trying to work with the towns on this, but we're strapped by state statute. And so thankfully, Maine School Management and Maine Municipal Association worked together, got a senator to sponsor the bill, and because there's so much support from both those organizations, I'm thinking it's going to pass. We'll see. And if it does, we'll be able to move the annual budget meeting earlier than the third week in May.
Yeah.
So that will allow for more absentee balloting, and it won't be this awkward thing like, oh, the school still hasn't, had their meeting yet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it will kind of get rid of that awkward period.
And we're thinking that would go in effect this year?
They're hoping it does.
You're hoping it
it's
does.
possible. A lot of legislation, it doesn't get enacted until July 1.
Right.
Or October, or whatever the date is that they set. But we'll see.
Okay, so this is wishful thinking. We're hoping. We
We're hoping.
prefer
Yes.
that it would be earlier.
Yep.
I mean, that would be impressive if it's moved that
Sometimes
quickly.
the legislature does. I mean, Mike probably follows the legislature way more than I do. But sometimes they'll pass something and say it's okay. It's immediately.
Okay.
They did
Sometimes
that.
they do it and it's retroactive.
Sometimes it's retroactive, and sometimes it's till next year.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if they pass it early, which they don't often do, but if they did, we might be able to do it this year. So we'll see.
Yeah. But we get a lot of, every year, it's a big issue of when we are presenting the budget. And both towns give us a lot of heat over it. So we thought it was important to make it public that it's out of our control. And we've said this every year consistently, probably for 27 years. So
The
we
cool
just want-
part is that it was a joint effort by a lot of people in these towns and the district. And the cool part is I think we're going to help everybody in the state, because this was an issue of the cart before the horse, and on one hand not knowing what the other was doing. But Scott and I know Mark Segrist and other people on this board, sort of pushed it forward, and it's kind of
That's
cool.
great.
Yeah.
So kudos. Please.
That's it.
Okay, good. All right, moving on. Committees, policy. Jared, please.
Okay, so we had two policies come out of committee today that will go on for first reading at our next board meeting on January 27th. I'll name them now, but I won't go into detail since I would just have to do it twice. But the first is a policy IJJ, which Heather Perkison and the other librarians had submitted comments on it over a year ago, and it's taken some time to get through it. And the other one, IJJ, is selection of educational materials. The second one is a replacement of policy JFA-BD, admission of homeless students. And this second one is purely a response to changes in the law. And we have new policy and a new rule that's been drafted by Drummond Woodsum. So you'll see those both for first read, and I'll give you more color on them at our next board meeting. And then tonight we have a second reading of policy IHBEA, programs for English learners. And just as a reminder, there's been no change to this policy. It just needs to be reviewed and date updated per Susie Robbins. So I don't know if it's just periodically you just have to review these to make sure that they, we didn't have any comments on it. Everything appeared to be in order. So that's coming up later on the agenda.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jared.
for the federal, the state audit, but the federal government is involved in that with ELL learners or ELL students. You have to have an updated policy every 5 years. So even if you change nothing, you have to make sure it's current within 5 years when they do an audit. So, got it. Thanks, Jeff.
I have one question around just the policy changes and the edits. A lot of times color alone is used to indicate changes, and that it creates accessibility issues because people with vision issues can't distinguish the colors, and screen readers, if they're using them, don't understand the different colors to be able to indicate the changes. So it's something we might want to look at going forward.
Yeah, if you have suggestions, we'd
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What I do as a teacher at the university is we also put them in different script or font and note it on the bottom. Because for that very reason, some students can't see the color.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's room for a more comprehensive system of, tracking the policies through. There's working with Fran recently, like not every version is captured, and you don't know like the history of it and comments necessarily. Stuff gets lost when it's saved over, and it could be improved, I'm sure.
Well, we could use, I was just thinking about this today when we were in policy committee, we could use tabs at the bottom since we use Google Docs. You can actually tab it by date, so you can see the version. That might be one way of looking at it. It's confusing still because then you have to figure out, okay, well, what got changed, but.
Inefficient.
Yeah, it's a different way of doing it. So most policies don't take this iteration, so hopefully it won't be this complicated, but there are policies that we have had that have been like that, so.
There's no way to make group editing efficient. I think you just need to track it, that's all. But it's always going to be inefficient.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, facilities, Mike.
Yeah. I was going to make a joke about how did you get a camel as a committee tried to create a horse and they turned it into a anyway, it's a bad joke, but one I love. So facilities committee met just before the break and dove into just sort of the core charge of what the committee is going to focus on, at least for the next number of months. The major pieces are getting the modulars, that process done. Scott is in discussions with the two potential options, looking at a purchase to purchase the modulars from Doton's, or if we continue to do the financing effort that we've been doing. He's discussing that with also talking, I should say, related to talking to Steve Blatt, who's an architect we've worked with to figure out campus configurations. Additionally, if people have want more information on the modulars, please ask Scott. I took notes, but not that detailed. We started to look at and discuss the broader list of capital projects for the district. So both the long-range facilities plan and the 10-year plan for our facilities. And so it's going to be the charge of the committee to review those two and to see, what items should be prioritized, changed, removed, so on and so forth. Jeff and Scott reshared those with everybody on the committee. And so we're going to be going over those and probably in our next meeting start to dig in a little bit more. Touched on a couple of the deferred maintenance issues and, what that looks like, and the pool is an area of discussion, noting it's not a safety issue or anything along those lines, but it's older and could use sprucing up, and there's some additions that could make it a more functional facility. And then the final thing that was discussed was walkthroughs of getting the board on campus and to see our facilities. And this is meshing quite well with the board goes back to school effort that Jeff is going to be talking about in a few minutes. But there is an interest, at least from the facilities committee, to also have the board come through with a facility-focused mind and look through our campus. Leanne, Anne, did I miss anything?
I think that captured it well, other than we need to make sure roofs are clearly indicated on our facilities documents to understand the age.
That is true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Fortunat's gonna want to know that.
Yes, he is.
Okay, moving on to curriculum. Tom, please.
In December, we were joined by Aaron Blanchette for a good data-filled discussion on standardized assessment performance. Jeff, you were remiss. There was talk of standard deviations and significance testing. You would have loved it.
I remember that course very well.
We're meeting again next. We will return to that topic at some point in the coming months. But our next meeting is Monday, and our tentative agenda is to discuss curricular funding priorities for the next year, and to spend some more time talking about the numbers we saw in the annual report earlier tonight.
Thank you. Jared, equity.
I don't think we've had a meeting since our last board meeting. I'll just say we did recently learn that Susie was able to schedule Lawrence Alexander to come to our next equity committee meeting next week. Unfortunately, I'm going to be away all week, so I won't be able to be there regrettably, but our co-chair, Tim Valenti, will be there for that meeting, and we'll be sending out an email to solicit the group for, or the committee for any suggestions or topics they'd like to discuss there. We're also going to get Lawrence's opinion on our new mission statement per Kim's suggestion at our last meeting. And I suppose if anyone else on the board wanted to raise any topics to bring up with Lawrence, please feel free to send me a note, and I'll make sure that gets forwarded along for the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Yep.
Student reports. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so I'll start. I have 2 points. First is that Lawrence Alexander will be coming to the high school on Friday to meet with students and answer any questions people might have about, how to approach equity and inclusion. And the other one is midterms or finals for semester courses. They're a big deal, and they're the week of Martin Luther King Day, correct? Yeah. So study.
Study.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Have to study. All the students watching will take it. Before break, we had the Winter Wonder Week, which Avery talked about at our last meeting, but the last day we had these different activities that were put together by students and staff. My advisory participated in the fashion show, which was actually in this room, and we actually won, which was pretty exciting.
Do you have photos?
No, it wasn't. I actually have these really cool American flag overalls, and that was actually the thing that won. But
request that we see an appearance of those at a board meeting.
Yeah. At a board meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. maybe when it gets more summery. But I felt like it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of good school spirit going around. I feel like after Spirit Weeks and after Winter Wonder Week, I always feel really good about the school, and just everyone feels a much more sense of camaraderie. So I really appreciate the principals and the administrators for putting that on. And also, secondly, the Dudley Cup happened yesterday. The biggest, a big hockey game, but it's the kind of the first big one, but the school all was there, and in the student section, unfortunately, we lost by a rather big margin, but I think that the season is definitely bright.
It's fun time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Okay, so ad hoc committees. I think that we need to do a workshop sometime regarding the new school.
Yep.
When could we fit that into the schedule?
Yeah, we'll talk and schedule it and get that in there.
So I think that, obviously that should be published to the public, and then I'm thinking it's a bit of a debrief. And I was thinking maybe we could invite Oak Point. Now, this is not a commitment to use Oak Point, but I think this debrief would be, a part of their existing contract, I would expect. And, just how everybody sees it, what we can do different, better, otherwise.
I think it's a good idea.
And Jason, I'm sorry.
And we could lay out a rough outline. So the big questions going forward are, in my mind anyway, is when do we put it out to referendum, obviously. So, and we've got this lingering question of you know, the financing and trying to get state financing that comes around in 2024 but doesn't finalize until 2026. You know, I've been thinking about this as if we had to answer this question necessarily, and I don't think we have to. I think we could aim for, say, June of 24, and as if we're going to referendum, and then as that time gets closer, we can make that final decision whether we wanted to go for the state funding, which is a bit of a long shot, but we just don't know how that's going to play out. So that'll need to be part of that discussion of that workshop. So that's one of the big questions.
I was really excited to hear about the partnership that happened between the schools and the communities around the solar project, and just thinking about what we can do to further engage both of the towns in these next stages of conversations.
It's a good point. You know, the solar piece percolated up just from conversations, and then, you know, myself, a couple people on the council and on the select board, like, hey, we should work on this jointly. I wonder if a new school, just sort of space issues in the community and how the district meets the community's needs, should be a joint effort going forward for the next year or so. I don't know. At least maybe as an open discussion to start.
There are many people in the community who would like that, and I'm not saying that that's why we should do it, but for what it's worth, the Cumberland North Yarmouth Facebook group is full of ideas on what we can be doing, but it's a sincere desire to be involved in this. There is big resentment that people who are not parents did not get the email or the district letter that Scott Jordan referred to a little bit ago. If we want to build good relationship right now and earn back some trust, then we absolutely need to involve maybe a direct invitation to some of the folks who were the most vocal, and we need to bring them in and at least extend that offer to be face to face to talk about this. That's going to be huge, in my opinion.
For the workshop, could we invite the council and the select board and then put it out broadly? I mean, that could be a little cacophonous to begin with, but I see fear in Vanessa's eyes, but probably share that feeling, but I don't know.
How about a survey to the entire communities and kind of look at that? And I'm like, we hear this, I feel like we're basing a lot of this off hearsay, she say, Facebook, this book. That if we just put an actual survey out and got the information, an anonymous survey, and got the results, then move forward that way. Because I feel like social media takes a very large presence, but I feel like the people that are barking on social media are very small. And repeat offenders in terms of not wanting any money spent within the school. So I just thought a survey to all the towns, all the community members, parents.
Perhaps we could do a ranked choice type survey like the students did for the solar project.
I mean, well, that's just how, Jason, how you were saying we didn't have a ranked choice, result from this.
Yeah.
So like all of this really ties together. And I think then,
and there's the elderly, there's a woman who's just starting up, and I'm going to botch this, so I apologize in advance, for the elderly community, that she reaches out to those who are not on, and Peter Bingham, she was at that community meeting with us, that she specifically brings information to the elderly community in both North Yarmouth and Cumberland. And I forget,
Sherry Boothby?
I think so. But she's fantastic. And so I think we could hit everybody.
I'm not opposed to a survey. I think that would be good if we could get a very large cross-section of, information from people. I think, I don't think we did a terrible job. I think that part of it is the atmosphere in the country, as I mentioned. But I think going forward, we could certainly do things better. And I think maybe having Melissa on staff now, she can help with some of that. And then I think, if we put a whole project forward again, I think we need to make sure that whoever helps us with that has an adequate marketing arm, or potentially we even look at a third-party marketing company. And I hate to use the word marketing, but just how about communications to make sure that we're doing it in an efficient way. Like our website could have been beefier so that, you know, the FAQs, instead of being in a Google Doc, which was like huge by the end of it, you know, individual, you know, pop-outs expand, and so we could link directly to individual FAQ questions, that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of stuff we could improve on. Takes resources, a little bit of investment probably, but.
I mean, I agree on the marketing piece, but I also think that part of it is being, you know, brought in on the process side, so maybe even support for facilitated meetings or planning workshops to help garner, you know, both information about, you know, what does this look like for our communities, but also to be transparent about how it's being, you know, put together to hopefully be put back out to voters.
And Vanessa, I totally understand what you're saying about, you know, a couple loud voices. Those loud voices got the vote no signs put out all over, which led to the Portland Press Herald interviews.
Right,
So
we didn't have one sign. I mean, I had a group of, and so I just think the yes votes, we didn't even have one sign saying vote yes.
Right, I'm just saying, I think
Like,
it
not
costs
one.
money.
Not one. We know a lot of people with deep pockets that put up those one signs, but it just, you know what I mean? Like, so we can go back and forth on that. I just,
Well, it wouldn't be our job to put up
Right.
vote yes signs. I mean, we put out a good project based on everything that we had that was, at the moment, you know, the best we could provide. But I think you're right, it is a little sad that there was no vote yes campaign by a third party. But also, maybe that's telling also about just sort of the atmosphere financially, because other projects have had vote yes, you know.
I think a lot of it was education too. I mean, we did our best, but there was to me, so many people just don't understand how much a new school cost, how much it cost, and they just keep saying how expensive it is. Like, yeah, we agree. So somehow we've got to.
And even though we say it, you know, the trust is so eroded that people don't believe your words, and so it's going to take time to fix some of these things. So,
yeah, I
So
would just.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so definitely, yeah, ways that we can really be very thoughtful about how this information is being communicated, that we are putting out information in measured intervals and not waiting for things to be more comprehensive, you know, that we're finding ways to bring people in so that's like, so they can say, oh, no, see, they have said that. They are doing this. They have been listening to us so that we can rebuild this trust that unfortunately has, for some people, been broken for a bit in the community. And I think, you know, how we handle this, how we move this forward is really going to kind of make or break some of the community support that we have out there.
and at the end of the day, the cost is the cost. Like,
that's what we say,
How
but
we
a
were
lot
gonna-
of people don't feel that way.
right, but the like, to your point, next year it's going to be more.
That's what I believe, yes.
And the year after that, it's going to be more. It's not going to go down. I mean, the rate on the bond might, and that's just going to be variable every 6 months, or so it's. So that's the message that everyone's like, oh, it's so expensive. It's so expensive. It's like, yes, building is expensive, and I don't think waiting. I mean, whatever we're going to decide as a board, but the big message is, we need a new school. It's going to be expensive.
So meanwhile, I do think there's something we can do, and that is every chance each of us get individually or up here, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. We've got to keep reminding them there's a problem. You know, the school's too crowded. They're doing their best, but it's not going away. We can talk about solar and everything else, but there's a problem. Don't let them forget.
That message is really important. I do wonder if we probably should be highlighting that a lot more.
Yeah.
Because for folks who don't have kids in the school, they're not going to know that. You know, they might drive by once in a while to Wilson School, but they don't really get the full extent of what is the middle school going to look like in 3 years. The middle school is going to need 10 to 12 rooms just over the next 3 years with projected enrollment. So, I mean, these are things that we're not going to have any space left on the campus, and that's why we have to really put this out there. I think we do need to make that very clear, that this is not going to go away. This is a recurring issue, and it's not going to get better. But I think, you know, I think the situation, I agree with Jason. I think there were a lot of projects that failed. I think there was a big price tag. I think there was questions about the property or the land that probably came up. But I also just think what people are wondering, you know, what about the money and what can we do? But with a project this size, most school districts do opt to hire a firm to help them, you know, not to sell the project, but to give out as much information, and because it's too much for staff and a board to do that, and that's why most districts, I would say the majority of districts, opt to hire somebody, a third party, to help with that information providing. So I would strongly put that out there as well. But I think a workshop is a good idea. I would at least, if nothing else, start with a workshop with the board and with Oak Point and have them there as well. And maybe just a debrief would be good to show the public that there's, you know, because people have asked me questions too, and staff have asked me what's happening next. And
I'd be curious to know who Cape Elizabeth used for their marketing, because I really liked their website for their new building project. It just was a very beautiful page too. I mean, aside from having the information, like it was just, it was really inviting, you know, and they talked about, they hosted various public walkthroughs of the site, and I would just be curious to know who they used.
Didn't theirs fail too?
It did, but.
So what are they doing now? What's Cape Elizabeth doing?
They are regrouping. They're in the same spot.
So I'd also point out the Portland Museum of Arts. They're redoing, is that what it is?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're doing a new project, and Tyler pointed it out to me, Tyler McGinley, that, and they've got this fantastic web page that really engages the public, like, you know, which one do you like, and here's the various concepts. And so I invite you guys to go and look at that. It's very impressive. It's like Cove something is the company that did it, the marketing company, and it just flows very well. So something like that could really help us.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ken.
Can we publicly at this meeting address the, was it the 10 acres on Tuttle that the town allegedly offered? I feel like we've talked about it, but that question keeps coming back up, and it would be nice to.
I don't think I can answer that. Jeff, can you?
I think if it's the same property that we discussed earlier in the process a couple of years ago, if it's the same property, I don't know exactly where on
Right
Tuttle
next to
is.
the train
It's
tracks.
right next to the railroad tracks, or very, very close. And there were a lot of concerns by the board and by the committee that was looking at the time that was not an appropriate site for a school. If it's the same parcel, I don't know.
I think it is. Yeah, I've been trying to find it over here. We had talked a few meetings ago about coming up with like a timeline.
Yeah.
You know, in 2019, we were looking at North Yarmouth, or just all these different things. And I don't know, maybe with your new assistant, whose name escapes my
Melissa.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that is something that we can revisit, because it would be so nice to be able to point people to that, like kind of like the FAQs, but the history of why this property isn't an option, and just to have these. Exactly.
I think that would be very helpful, Kim, to have the history at a glance, easy to navigate. And to that point, I wholeheartedly agree with what everybody's saying about bringing in the community, just make people feel involved for sure. But, you know, in defense of the people that came before us that worked on these projects, that did happen in the other projects as well. So somehow we've got to also encourage, you know, twist the arm of people to stay involved and absorb the information as it's happening, and not just sort of arrive at the finish line when the enormous price tag is so terrible to look at, you know. Because a lot of these processes that we're talking about, they did happen. You know, these discussions did occur. So
yeah, I think one of the things when I was reflecting on it, and I know this is probably more for the workshop, but I do think when the price tag finally was put together, there wasn't a huge amount of time between the final price tag and then the vote. And I think you almost have to introduce the price tag earlier, give people time to, instead of just react, to understand why it's $71 million. What makes that up? And we really only had a matter of weeks when we really should have probably had a matter of months to help with that.
Because the narrative certainly got weaved around it being that site.
And that price.
Right.
Yeah, and it really did. I think it's helpful to put that out earlier now, and just let people absorb that and help them understand. You know, and we didn't have that final number, but just in the future.
Well, we certainly have a starting point.
Yeah.
We know it's going to be probably that much. Hopefully not, but I wouldn't expect it to go down.
Construction costs never go down.
I mean, so it's going to be $90 million.
Mike
what can
Williams
we do for
said
90?
costs will definitely go. Yep. No, I agree.
If I recall correctly, the 2019 project was like $45 million, and that was still too much.
Yep.
Like, you put a big number in front of people,
Yeah.
it's going to be too much.
Yeah.
Styles Way, sorry, is the place.
That's the brush dump, yeah.
And that was the one too close to the train tracks?
Train tracks are right there.
I believe that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yes.
the town hall.
Styles Way is the brush dump right next to the train tracks,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So how, and I know we need to workshop this, but as a board, I really believe that there needs to be a better way of answering people's questions. 171 comments were on this one post in that Facebook group, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to Facebook, but it mattered in this election. Facebook mattered in this election, and we can't deny that. So we need to figure out how to directly answer people's questions when it comes up, because they'll say, oh, we need to talk to Porter about this, or, you know, somebody needs to blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if it would work, but it just feels wrong when I'm reading these comments to not address it and to not say.
I wonder if we could find the person that is most vocal in that group and invite them to the workshop and participate from the beginning to the end.
That's what I was saying before.
Just that most vocal person. And
I think what people, if I would suggest this real quick, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step in front of somebody. Did I step in front of you, Mike? Sorry. I was going to say, I think the process is important too. If people know what I think people are probably asking all these questions and comments because they're not sure what's happening next. So I think once some sort of a process, once it's workshopped, and maybe part of the focus of the workshop is what can we put out for communication? What can the district put out and say, look, this is what we're doing next? Just kind of like the short-term plan, we obviously have to talk about the modulars. Scott and I was going to piggyback off of what Mike had said. We'll be presenting on February 6th. We talked today and decided it was going to be February 6th. Not January 17th, we won't have enough information by then, but just for the short term, modular, all the pieces so that the board can look at all of it together. And I don't know if it needs to go to facilities first. We'll try to work on that, Mike. But obviously, and that's just going to be the messaging that we need to put out there. And I don't know if it's the same with a long-term plan at the workshop. Is there communication that the board wants to have that this is the process that we're going to use? I think that's probably what people want more than anything is, what's your timeline, what's your process? Because otherwise people will start offering a lot of things, and it's important that people are thinking about this, and I'm glad people are engaged because we've got a problem to solve still. But I think probably more important to get people wrapped into what is the process that the board is going to use or is thinking about using long-term to look at this again.
And to be clear, the process thus far since the referendum is basically the communication that's gone out. I mean, other than a lot of thinking that I'm sure we've all done, you know, other than extending the option on that land, there hasn't been a process. We've been focused on the short term on the modulars.
Yeah, and I think getting the short-term one under the belt on hopefully February 6th, the board will have a chance to look at that and say yes, because we've got to move forward with something pretty quickly for the short term. And then the long term as well, getting that looked at and then communicating that out through all the avenues we can to the entire community. You know, this is the process, or this is where the board direction is on this project. Because in the absence of that, I think people will keep asking questions and offering comments.
I think, interestingly enough, for those 170 comments, I got one email asking questions, you know, which is just, you know, bizarre that people don't just reach out and go right to the you know, source or whatever. But
it is bizarre, because thinking back to COVID and all the very difficult, how many emails did we get, Ann, 2 years ago? We got bombarded with emails, Vanessa, you remember. So and then with this school building, you know, there's a fiery of like, it seemed like 6 to 12 people on Facebook. We get one email.
Yeah,
and
that was
so it was hard to understand where this well is.
I think it's important not to ignore Facebook. It's important, I think, to collect what the questions are. But for me, I would still want to make the website or the web page, which should be better than it was, but be one source of data. And so I would say, if we have that ability to link directly to FAQs, you can say, oh, okay, somebody's asking this question, we answer it on the web page, nice and pretty, easy to access, and provide the link. So then you're not answering in an email to one person, you're answering, you know, and that one answer is seen by everybody and then directs them back to the website where there's a ton more of information. So we can improve these things, I'm sure, you know, with a smart web person.
Final request, is there a way for the letter that went out to district parents just before vacation, is there a way to send that, include that in the crier, the notes? I mean, it's been a couple weeks, everybody's seen it now, but I think a little damage control needs to be done there to folks who did not get that because they don't have kids in the district.
I think those are the wrong words. I wouldn't use damage control. But there are, Jeff, there's a way that people could sign up so that they get our newsletter even if they're not in the district. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I gave that to one community member who I know was asking how can they get more information from the district. And we do send things. One of my goals is to give the town more information, to put in the notes and in the crier, so that they're both getting more information from the district. We started doing that a year ago. Sometimes hit or miss. Towns sometimes have really full newsletters and they can't accept our stuff. And I completely understand. We have the same problem sometimes with ours. But I think just making an effort. But I don't know if that note needs to come from the board. I can just take it and copy and paste it and ask both towns to put it out this week. Or if you want something more comprehensive, or if you want me to just take what that language is and just get it out.
I would think your newsletter should always be linked in the crier. That would be helpful.
We've asked for that. Yeah, I think sometimes parts of it will be, but not all of it. So it's something that...
Well, sometimes it's toward the end, like we found that one time, and then if people with Gmail don't scroll all the way down or hit view entire message, then they don't see it at all. So that's
we appreciate the towns including us at all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We don't really put a lot of town information in ours, but no, I think we've got to find new ways to communicate with other people in the community that don't have kids.
Is it possible to reach out to the towns and just have a sign up at the town hall to receive school district emails, and especially those interested parties?
Yeah, we could send the link. We've done that before. We've sent it to the crier and the notes, and I know they've put it in, where they've put it out periodically every few months. If you want to sign up for the district's newsletters, here's the link.
That kind of will eliminate all these people who are like, we don't have kids, we're not receiving the updates, where I feel like we have a lot of updates.
And most of the time people won't think about it until something engages them,
right,
like a topic now. So maybe more people will now sign up now that this has occurred. But we can certainly do that at least this week, is make sure that link.
And maybe respond on Facebook and say, if you would like to receive the district newsletter, just click here. And then
That'd be
that
great.
little notion of that we're not communicating nips it in the bud.
Right.
Maybe the forecaster also has a place to get a digital link in there.
Yeah, I think the forecaster's an underrepresented tool for the district. I don't think we put a lot of information into the forecaster. And I'd like to start using the forecaster more. And there is a new reporter that just started at the forecaster. And she did ask me, you know, how would you like to communicate and those
Be
kind of
great.
things. So I think this is an opportunity
Yeah, because
for us to start putting more information in.
Did, and your newsletters are on the website as well, right? Under latest news.
Yes, the latest one wasn't. We, I think, did that today. We'd fix that today, but yes, they are.
And then the archives from past are still.
Are on the bottom.
Okay. All right. Anything else on that topic? All right. Other ad hoc stuff, liaisons or community partners or whatever? Avery?
When is the environment committee coming?
You might have been away when we formed that last meeting, so.
We've arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it was made.
It exists now, and you're on it, I think.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
Want to be chair?
Quite sure.
Yeah, I'll be chair. You want to be co-chair?
Christina does.
Um,
Let's set a meeting.
Yes, Avery.
We'll email tomorrow.
Mike,
Figure out a
Christina,
meeting.
Avery,
Perfect.
me, ex officio, and we've got to assign some
Christina, myself, Avery.
staff members as well, like, so that there's overlap with the green team and stuff.
So we don't have membership yet. We
Not full membership.
So we
Board is.
Okay.
Yep.
So before the first meeting, though, do we need full membership? Probably.
We want to bring in the staff and overlap. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It's Jason's fault.
Yep.
All right.
It's my fault.
No, I'm kidding.
I'm learning everything's my fault.
You're the man in the big chair.
Yeah. Okay, other ad hoc stuff? Okay, moving on to communications, and there is an item here. The board goes back to school, which
I'll
is
make this
exciting.
really brief, but it is exciting. We are starting to schedule all 4 schools and visits and inviting board members to, any member of the board to join us on these, and it will be during the school day because we want you to see kids, we want you to see teachers and action and all that, so it'll be that. But it's the first time we've done this in 3 years, so hopefully you'll be able to join us for at least one of them. We'll have 4 different ones, and join whatever one you're interested or available to. And we'll be, the principal of the school will be bringing the group around during that time. It's will be about 45, 50 minutes, showing you a few things. And then obviously you'll have a chance to look at the facilities. There'll be a walkthrough for most of the facility at that point, and they might highlight some things and then give you an opportunity to ask questions and comment. And it's kind of a fast hour, but it is one that we've gotten some really good feedback from board members in the past that they really appreciate this and get a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I just want to let you know that we've just started scheduling those. Fran started scheduling them today, and we should have a schedule for you so that we're doing this. We'd like to get most of them done before the February break. If we can, there might be 1 or 2 after the break, but that's my plan.
Is this each of us goes once, or is this going to be a group?
No, it's group.
No,
It's a group, okay.
So as many, we can accommodate as many as we have on the board, and I'll be going to all of them.
The
and,
best.
Scott
so
will
great.
probably be going to them
I'm excited.
as well, and we'll accommodate as many people as can go to a group, and and go to as many as you want, or don't go to none. It doesn't. We're good. We just want to give everybody an opportunity.
Will they be offered on different days of the week?
It will be, yes. It won't be offered all in one day. We'll be doing different weeks, different days of the week, different times of a day, so that we know that people have different schedules. So, yeah.
But the facilities tours are going to be separate from this, right?
So originally, I think it was going to be separate, and I just offered, could we do it together? I know it won't be the same as going in and looking at facilities like that. That may be something the facilities committee still wants to do separate with Scott, Don, and
Yeah.
others.
I think that's a
Yeah,
big
could be
yes.
separate.
Yeah. different,
separate.
different,
Mhm.
different focus.
Yep, yep, and that's something we can just do separately. That wouldn't probably involve the principals. We're asking them to do this piece, which is more academics. They might point something out facility-wise, but
Yep, okay.
that would be more Scott and Don.
Questions, comments, concerns on that? Okay, moving on to,
Oh,
wait, communications, catch-all, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, no, I just, since I wasn't able to be here at the last meeting, I just wanted to follow up on, Leanne, you had brought up about the importance of us making sure we hash out committee assignments and that a bit better in terms of like parent reps and all of that. And I agree that I think that we should go back to the bylaws through policy to just to make sure that we have it all written out. So I just wanted to put in my my also request for that.
Others? Okay. Moving on to 9 items for action, which is the second reading of policy IHBEA, programs for English learners. Jared mentioned this. There was 0 changes to it, and it appears to be strictly an obligation for reviewing it every 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I
Christina?
just have a question about it.
Yep.
The parent, the opportunities for parent involvement, does that include like translators if parents need them, so the children aren't translating for them, or?
Yes, we do have, not very many, but we do have some families who have to, who they don't request it. We know that they need a translator or interpreter, and we make sure that those are available. And we've had a little bit more of that recently with some of our newer students.
For parent conferences too, that
Yes.
they're available.
Yes, we do
without
provide that.
them having to
That's part of
ask.
our allow plan for the district. We're required to make sure that those are accessible. Yes.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Deborah Howard, who is our ELL specialist teacher for the district, she coordinates that. Yep.
Okay. Is there a motion?
A motion to approve policy IHBEA, programs for English learners, as presented.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Second.
Thank you, Christina. So to be clear, this is the second reading, which is the adopting of the policy. Anything else? Questions, concerns? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, item number 10, do I hear a motion?
To adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Mike. All in favor? Unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you.
Didn't want any discussions.